I woke up in a hospital bed with a fractured rib and a cast on my leg, expecting my son to ask if I was okay. Instead, he and his wife burst through the door, furious that my near-death experience was inconveniencing their luxury vacation to the Maldives. "We cannot pause our lives to babysit you," she screamed. I just smiled, nodded, and waited for them to leave. 5 minutes later, I made a single phone call that cut off their $10,000 monthly allowance. A few hours after that, my phone lit up with 36 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful family member a lesson they will never forget. My name is Tobias Wright. I am 70 years old, and this is how I destroyed the entitled monsters living under my roof. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room burned my eyes as I slowly regained consciousness. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound keeping me grounded. My chest ached with every breath, courtesy of 3 fractured ribs, and my right leg was encased in a heavy plaster cast. The police officer who pulled me from the wreckage of my car had told the paramedics I was lucky to be alive. I expected to wake up to the worried faces of my family. I expected the son I had raised to rush to my bedside to hold my hand and thank God his father had survived. Instead, the heavy wooden door of my hospital room was shoved open with brutal force. Devin, my 38-year-old son, marched in with his wife Megan hot on his heels. There were no tears in their eyes. There was no relief on their faces. There was only pure, unadulterated rage. "Dad, what the hell is this?" Devin barked, stopping at the foot of my bed. "Do you have any idea what time it is? Our flight to the Maldives leaves in 6 hours. Megan crossed her arms, her face flushed with indignation. "We cannot cancel this trip, Tobias. We have been planning this luxury getaway for months. Do not expect us to pause our entire lives just to stay here and babysit you. You are going to have to figure this out on your own because our vacation comes first." I laid there in the sterile hospital bed, the pain in my chest suddenly feeling much deeper than just fractured bones. For a moment, the sheer audacity of their words left me completely speechless. I was 70 years old, hooked up to an IV monitor covered in dark purple bruises, and my only child was throwing a massive tantrum over a beach vacation. Megan stepped closer to the bed, her designer heels clicking sharply against the cold linoleum floor. She did not ask how my pain levels were. She did not ask what the doctors had said about my recovery or if I needed surgery. Instead, she reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out the spare keys to my house, and tossed them carelessly onto the rolling tray table next to my bed. They landed with a loud metallic clatter that echoed in the quiet room. "We are leaving the spare keys right here," she said, her voice dripping with a sickening blend of annoyance and condescension. "You can call the nurse to help you reach them. Hire a home aide or something when they finally discharge you. We are not going to be around to push your wheelchair or feed you soup. You have more than enough money to pay a stranger to do that for you." Devin ran a hand over his perfectly styled hair, letting out an exaggerated sigh. He looked down at his pristine outfit with absolute disgust, completely ignoring his injured father. "Look at this place," he muttered, brushing invisible dust off his sleeve. "This is a $5,000 custom suit, Dad. Do you know how unsanitary these hospital rooms are? I am probably going to have to get this dry cleaned before we even head to the airport. I cannot believe you got into a car accident today of all days. It is incredibly selfish, honestly. You always have to make everything about you." I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and realized I was staring at a complete stranger. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had comforted through every childhood nightmare, was entirely gone. In his place stood an arrogant, entitled man who viewed his own father as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. I had spent decades trying to give him the world, trying to ensure he never had to struggle the way I did when I was growing up as a young black man in this country. I thought I was protecting him. But as I watched Megan check her diamond watch and roll her eyes at the delay, the bitter truth washed over me. My protection had not saved him. It had corrupted him. It had turned them both into monsters who valued a week at a luxury resort over my very life. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not try to guilt them into staying or beg for their compassion. Instead, a slow, cold smile crept across my bruised face. It was the kind of smile that comes not from joy, but from absolute crystal-clear realization. "You are absolutely right," I said, my voice quiet but incredibly steady despite the pain in my chest. "You two should not miss your flight. Go ahead. Enjoy the Maldives. I will take care of myself from here." Devin looked momentarily confused by my calm reaction, expecting a fight, but the relief quickly washed over his face. "See, Megan, "I told you he would be fine," he said, already turning his back on me and heading toward the door. "We will send you a postcard, Dad. Try not to cause any more drama while we are gone." They walked out of the room without a single glance backward, the heavy door swinging shut and leaving me alone in the quiet hum of the medical machinery. I waited exactly 5 minutes. Then I reached over, picked up the hospital phone on the bedside table, and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the direct line to the private wealth management division of my bank. What Devin and Megan conveniently ignored in their blind, pampered arrogance was exactly who they were dealing with. I was not just some fragile, helpless old man waiting to die. 40 years ago, my late wife Camille and I started with a single rusted delivery truck. Through decades of sweat and sacrifice, I built a logistics and commercial real estate empire from the absolute ground up. The company Devin pretended to help run as a vice president was entirely my company. The luxury lifestyle they flaunted was funded by my blood and sweat, and the unlimited black credit cards they were currently carrying in their designer wallets were issued solely in my name. "Hello, Richard," I said when my personal banker answered the line. "I need you to immediately freeze the 2 auxiliary black cards issued to Devin and Megan Wright. Yes, effective this exact second. Decline all future transactions." Next, I dialed Gregory Thorne. Gregory was my personal attorney, a ruthless, brilliant legal mind who had navigated my corporate battles for over 2 decades. Gregory the First said as soon as he picked up, "I need you to initiate a full financial audit on Devin. I also need you to draft the paperwork to revoke his corporate access. I am cutting him off. Completely." Less than 10 minutes later, the bank sent an automated alert to my phone confirming that the accounts were locked. The trap was set, and the timing could not have been more perfect. I laid my head back against the thin hospital pillow, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over my aching body. I closed my eyes, but the tranquility was short-lived. Exactly 2 hours later, my cell phone began to vibrate on the table. It buzzed once, then twice, then continuously. The screen lit up with Devin's name, followed by Megan's over and over again. I let them go straight to voicemail. Finally, a notification popped up for a voice message. I pressed play, holding the speaker to my ear. "Tobias, what the hell did you do?" Megan's voice shrieked through the speaker, completely devoid of her usual polished charm. "We are at the VIP check-in desk at JFK and your card just declined. They are humiliating us in front of everyone. Fix this right now." I smiled, deleted the message, and turned my phone completely off. I waited a full hour before turning my phone back on. The screen instantly froze under the weight of 36 missed calls and 14 new voicemails. I tapped the first audio file and held it up to my ear. Megan was no longer using her polished country club voice. She was shrieking in pure, unadulterated panic. "Tobias, answer the phone right now," she screamed. "We are standing at the Emirates first-class check-in desk and your black card just declined. Do you hear me? Declined." The ticketing agent actually handed it back to me in front of a line of people. "Fix this immediately." The second voicemail was even more frantic. I could hear the ambient noise of the busy JFK terminal in the background. The chaotic shuffling of luggage and the drone of intercom announcements framed her absolute hysteria. Megan sounded completely unhinged. "They are looking at us like we are criminals, Tobias. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? People are literally staring at me." The agent tried running the card 3 times, and the machine keeps flashing a bright red fraud alert. I tried to use my other card, and that one is blocked too. "Did you forget to pay your bill? You need to call Richard at the bank right this second and clear this up. We are going to miss our flight, and we are losing our deposit on the Overwater Villa." I listened to message after message, each one escalating in volume and desperation. Her carefully constructed facade of a wealthy, carefree socialite was crumbling spectacularly right in the middle of Terminal 4. She was throwing a massive tantrum surrounded by the very people she usually looked down upon. The barrage of voicemails from Megan was suddenly interrupted by an incoming call. The caller ID flashed Devin. I let it ring 4 times before finally swiping to answer. I did not even have the chance to say hello before my son began barking orders through the receiver. "Dad, what is going on with the bank accounts?" Devin demanded. His tone was not panicked like his wife. It was demanding, arrogant, and dripping with furious authority. "I am standing here arguing with a supervisor because your bank flagged our accounts and locked us out of the system. I need you to call your wealth manager right now and authorize a manual override. The total for our flight upgrades and the resort deposit is $40,000. Just tell them it is a legitimate charge." I adjusted my position in the hospital bed, feeling the dull ache in my fractured ribs. I looked at the stark white ceiling of my room. My voice remained perfectly calm, completely devoid of the anger burning inside my chest. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Devin." The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" He snapped, his frustration bubbling over into pure rage. "Stop playing games, Dad. This is not the time to be a stubborn old man. We are holding up the entire line, and Megan is practically having a full-blown panic attack by the luggage carousel. Just make the call." The bank clearly made a mistake and froze the primary ledger. It was almost comical how entitled he sounded. He genuinely believed the world revolved around his convenience. "The bank did not make a mistake, Devin," I replied slowly, making sure every single word landed with absolute precision. "I authorized the freeze. The black cards in your wallet are issued under my primary account. Since you explicitly stated that you cannot pause your lives to babysit me, I realized I needed to rapidly reallocate my financial resources. I will be needing those funds to pay for my own medical care, rehabilitation, and any other assistance I require." Devin let out a harsh, bitter laugh of total disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You are throwing a massive tantrum and cutting off our access just because we are going on a planned vacation. You have millions of dollars, Dad. Do not be ridiculous. Unfreeze the cards before we lose our reservations. I am not asking you, I am telling you." His absolute lack of respect was staggering. He was not asking his injured father for help. He was commanding me as if I were one of his subordinates at the logistics firm. He truly believed he held the ultimate power in our relationship simply because I had always given him everything he ever wanted without question. I did not bother engaging with his childish demands. Instead, I simply hung up the phone, cutting him off mid-sentence. I knew he would try to call back immediately to continue his tirade, so I switched my phone to silent mode. I had far more pressing matters to attend to than arguing with a spoiled adult. I reached for the call button clipped to my hospital bed and pressed it firmly. A few minutes later, a sharp-looking woman in pristine blue scrubs walked into my room. Her name tag read Nina. She was a private duty nurse I had requested through the hospital concierge service earlier that morning. Nina had a stellar reputation for being fiercely professional, highly competent, and incredibly loyal to her patients. "Mr. Wright," Nina said with a warm but entirely businesslike tone, standing at attention near the foot of my bed. "I understand you are looking for 24-hour private care upon your discharge." "That is correct, Nina," I replied, offering a genuine smile for the first time that day. "I need someone who can manage my medications, assist with my physical therapy, and ensure my household runs smoothly while I recover from these fractures. I am willing to pay triple your current agency rate if you agree to work exclusively for me starting today." Nina did not hesitate. "Consider it done, Mr. Wright. I will handle all the discharge paperwork and coordinate your secure transport home immediately." As Nina efficiently moved around the room, organizing my charts and checking my vitals, I picked up my phone to send Devin one final text message. I wanted to make my position crystal clear, leaving no room for negotiation or misunderstanding. I typed out the words deliberately. "Devin, the auxiliary black cards are now strictly reserved for the medical professionals and staff who will actually be taking care of me during my lengthy recovery. Since you and Megan have made it absolutely clear that my health is not your priority, you no longer qualify for that financial privilege. Furthermore, I have already contacted the airline and revoked your access to the first-class VIP lounge. You will not be charging any complimentary champagne to my account while I sit in a hospital bed. Enjoy the Maldives if you can still somehow afford the tickets." I hit send and tossed the phone onto the side table. For years, I had blindly funded their lavish lifestyle, believing that providing for my family was my ultimate duty as a successful father. I had paid for their designer clothes, their expensive cars, and their exotic luxury vacations. But the accident had forced my eyes wide open. I was no longer going to finance the lives of two parasites who saw me as nothing more than a walking bank account. 30 miles away at Terminal 4, the harsh reality of their situation finally crashed down on them. Without my black cards, they were completely stranded in the middle of the airport. Devin had maxed out his own personal credit limits months ago, pouring money into a failing venture he kept hidden from me. Megan had zero income of her own, relying entirely on my generosity to fund her socialite image. They could not pay for the expensive flight upgrades, they could not cover the exorbitant resort fees, and they certainly could not afford to keep up their wealthy facade for another minute. Humiliated and seething with a dark rage they could not publicly express, they were forced to drag their heavy designer luggage away from the ticketing counter in defeat. But they were not going back to their luxury condo. They knew the only way to get their limitless funding back was to manipulate the source directly. Desperate and venomous, they turned their car around and headed straight back to the hospital. They were coming to put on the performance of a lifetime, ready to play the roles of the devoted, loving children they so clearly were not. The heavy hospital door creaked open, breaking the quiet peace Nina had just established in my room. Less than 3 hours had passed since their spectacular meltdown at the airport terminal, but Devin and Megan had somehow managed to completely overhaul their demeanor. There was no shouting this time. There were no demands about unfreezing credit cards or complaints about ruined Maldives vacations. Instead, they walked in with their heads bowed, playing the roles of the desperately worried children to absolute perfection. Megan was actually wiping away forced tears, carefully avoiding smudging her expensive mascara. In her hands, she carried a cheap plastic-wrapped fruit basket from the hospital gift shop. It was a laughable gesture, considering they usually only bought imported organic produce and vintage wines. She placed the flimsy basket on the edge of my tray table as if offering a priceless sacrifice. "Oh, Tobias," she whimpered, her voice shaking with artificial sorrow. "We are so incredibly sorry. We were just so overwhelmed by the shock of your accident that we completely panicked. We did not mean a single word we said earlier. We were just terrified of losing you." Devin stood right beside her, nodding solemnly. He had managed to smooth out the wrinkles in his $5,000 suit and was now sporting an expression of deep, filial piety. "Dad, I apologize for losing my temper," he murmured, pulling up a chair and sitting unusually close to my bed. The stress of the situation just clouded my judgment. "You are our priority. We came straight back because we realized how selfish we were being. We want to be here for you." I looked at the pathetic fruit basket, and then at their meticulously crafted expressions of grief. It took every ounce of my willpower not to laugh out loud at the sheer absurdity of their performance. They settled into the room, attempting to fill the sterile air with empty words of affection and hollow promises of care. Nina stood quietly in the corner, observing them with the sharp, analytical eyes of a seasoned medical professional. I gave her a subtle nod, and she discreetly excused herself to check on my discharge paperwork, giving my son and daughter-in-law the false sense of privacy they were so clearly desperate for. As soon as the door clicked shut behind Nina, the atmosphere in the room subtly shifted. The fake tears dried up, and the underlying agenda began to surface. Devin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, adopting his most serious corporate posture. "Dad, we know you are going to have a long and painful road to recovery," he began, his tone dripping with fake concern. "The doctors said those fractured ribs and your leg will keep you bedridden for weeks, maybe even months. You should not have to carry the immense burden of the business while you are trying to heal. You need to focus entirely on resting." I remained perfectly still, letting him dig his own grave. "And what exactly do you propose, Devin?" I asked, my voice neutral. "Well," he continued smoothly, running a hand over his chin, "I think it would be in the best interest of the company and your own health if you temporarily signed over full power of attorney to me. Just until you are back on your feet, of course. I can handle the logistics firm, manage the corporate accounts, and ensure your personal finances are paid on time. You would not have to worry about a single bank transfer or executive decision. It makes perfect sense, Dad." While Devin spun his web of corporate buzzwords, pretending to be a capable leader, my eyes darted toward the other side of the room. Megan had quietly slipped away from the bedside and was now pretending to admire the bland hospital artwork hanging near the small closet. But her focus was not on the painting. Her gaze was locked onto my worn leather briefcase, which Nina had brought from the wreckage of my car and placed on the visitor chair. I watched through the reflection of the television screen mounted on the wall as Megan swiftly and silently unclasped the brass buckles of the briefcase. Her manicured fingers slipped inside, sifting through my private documents, my business ledgers, and my personal contacts. She was hunting for anything she could use to regain access to my wealth, while her husband tried to smooth-talk me into handing over the keys to the kingdom. They were operating like a pair of common thieves, staging a distraction while picking my pockets right in front of me. I let her snoop for a few more seconds, memorizing exactly how low she was willing to stoop. Then I turned my full, undivided attention back to my son. "Devin," I said, cutting through his endless rambling about executive responsibilities, "do you honestly believe I am suffering from brain damage alongside these broken bones?" His confident smile faltered instantly. "Dad, what are you talking about? I am just trying to help." I pushed myself up slightly, ignoring the sharp spike of pain in my chest. "You are trying to secure unrestricted access to my corporate accounts because your black card was declined at an airport terminal," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. "Do not insult my intelligence by dressing up your greed as filial concern. You want power of attorney. You want to run the logistics firm. Let me remind you of a few undeniable facts about your position in my company. You are a vice president in name only, Devon. You wear expensive suits, you play golf with clients on Friday afternoons, and you attend board meetings to nod at my decisions. But you do not run anything. You have never run anything." Devon flushed a deep shade of angry red, opening his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand, silencing him completely. 40 years ago, I started that company with nothing but a rusted delivery truck and a prayer. Your mother, Camille, and I worked 20-hour shifts. She kept the books at the kitchen table until her fingers bled while I drove through blizzards to make deliveries on time. That logistics empire was built on the sweat, blood, and tears of a black man and woman who refused to let this world crush them. We built it so you would never have to know the feeling of starving. But I see now that in giving you everything, we accidentally gave you nothing of value. You have no work ethic, Devon. You have no loyalty. You possess zero strategic vision. If I handed you the reins to the company today, you would bankrupt the entire operation in less than 6 months just to fund your wife's designer handbag addiction. You are a figurehead. You have always been a figurehead. And you will never lay a single finger on my power of attorney or my corporate accounts as long as I have breath in my lungs." Devon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the floor. The facade of the loving son completely shattered, leaving behind the spoiled, enraged boy he truly was. "You cannot do this to me," he spat, his fists clenched at his sides. "I am your only son. You owe me. I owe you nothing," I countered, staring him down with absolute authority. "I fulfilled my duty as a father the day you turned 18. Everything you have received since then has been a privilege you have officially revoked by showing me exactly how little my life means to you. Now get out of my hospital room, both of you, before I have security physically remove you from the premises." Megan quickly snapped her hand out of my briefcase, her face pale but her eyes burning with a venomous fury. She grabbed her designer bag and rushed to Devon's side, pulling his arm to drag him toward the door. "Come on, Devon," she hissed, glaring at me with pure hatred. "He has lost his mind. There is no reasoning with him right now." They stormed out of the room, slamming the heavy door behind them, leaving the cheap fruit basket sitting on the table as a pathetic monument to their failed manipulation. But as they left, I noticed something missing from the side pocket of my briefcase. Megan had not just been snooping. She had managed to discreetly photograph a confidential medical business card belonging to a highly connected private physician I consulted for corporate matters. In that brief moment before the door clicked shut, I saw the sinister, calculating gleam flash in her eyes. If she could not persuade me to hand over my wealth voluntarily, she had clearly just found a way to take it by force. Her wicked mind was already piecing together a terrifying plot to declare me mentally incompetent and lock me away in a nursing home forever. 3 days later, the hospital finally cleared my discharge. Nina wheeled me through the grand double doors of my own estate, guiding me with the quiet efficiency I was already paying her triple to maintain. The sprawling foyer of the mansion was pristine just the way I liked it, but the atmosphere felt entirely wrong. The comforting aroma of my favorite coffee was completely missing. Maria, my fiercely loyal housekeeper who had worked for our family for over 2 decades, was nowhere to be seen. In her place stood a severe-looking woman I had never met, rapidly texting on her phone. She barely glanced up when my wheelchair rolled across the marble floor. "Where is Maria?" I demanded, my voice slicing through the quiet space. Megan sauntered out of the formal dining room wearing a designer tracksuit, sipping a green smoothie with absolute nonchalance. "Oh, I let Maria go yesterday morning," Megan stated casually, waving a manicured hand in the air. "She was getting too old to handle the deep cleaning anyway. Plus, she asked too many questions. I hired Brenda instead. She comes highly recommended by my mother and will be keeping a very close eye on your recovery schedule, Tobias." She smiled, but the hidden message was crystal clear. Brenda was not a housekeeper. She was a warden. Megan had planted a spy right inside my own home, hoping to monitor my every move, intercept my mail, and report back to her. I looked at Brenda, who quickly put her phone away and offered a fake polite nod. I did not argue or shout. I simply stored that piece of information away. They wanted to play a game of espionage inside the very house I built. They had no idea how outmatched they were. The following morning, the true depth of Megan's arrogance was put on full display. I was sitting in the sunroom going over physical therapy routines with Nina when Megan strutted down the grand staircase. She was dressed for her morning Pilates session, swinging a set of silver keys around her index finger. I recognized the distinct leather keychain immediately. They were the keys to my vintage Porsche, a flawless classic vehicle I had purchased to celebrate my 50th birthday. It was my absolute pride and joy, kept in pristine condition under a custom cover in the third garage bay. Devin had tried to borrow it a dozen times over the years, and I had always flatly refused. Now his wife was swinging the keys like a cheap plastic toy. "I am heading to the luxury fitness club downtown," Megan announced loudly, ensuring I could hear her over the classical music playing in the background. "Devin took the Range Rover and my Mercedes needs a detailing, so I am just going to borrow your little sports car for the week. It is not like you will be needing it anytime soon anyway, Tobias." She walked right up to my wheelchair, looking down at my heavy plaster cast and the tight medical brace around my ribs. A cruel, condescending smirk played on her lips as she drank in the sight of my physical vulnerability. "You know it is truly a shame about your leg," she continued, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "You are going to be trapped in that wheelchair for months. By the time you can even press a gas pedal again, you might be too blind or senile to pass a driving test. It would be a complete tragedy to let a beautiful machine like that just sit in the garage collecting dust while you rot away in this chair. I will make sure the engine gets a good workout for you. It is the least I can do since we are sacrificing so much to deal with this highly stressful situation." She tossed her expensive gym bag over her shoulder and flipped her blonde hair, acting as if she owned the entire estate. She genuinely believed my broken bones equated to a broken spirit. She thought my physical weakness meant she had finally gained the upper hand over me. I looked up at her, maintaining complete and utter composure. "You are right, Megan," I said softly. "It is a beautiful machine. Drive safely." She let out a triumphant laugh, clearly thrilled that I had seemingly surrendered without a fight. She turned on her heels and strutted out the front door. As soon as she was out of earshot, I turned my head and locked eyes with my nurse. "Nina," I said, maintaining my calm demeanor. "It is time." Nina immediately pulled her tablet from her medical bag and tapped the screen twice. "I already confirmed the arrival window, Mr. Wright," she stated briskly. "They are pulling through the main security gates right now." I slowly maneuvered my wheelchair toward the massive bay windows that overlooked the expansive circular driveway. The timing was nothing short of cinematic. Just as Megan reached the driveway and pressed the unlock button on the key fob, a massive, heavy-duty flatbed tow truck roared up the driveway, blocking her path entirely. The air brakes hissed loudly as the truck came to a complete halt right in front of the garage. Two men wearing official dealership uniforms hopped out of the cab, carrying clipboards and heavy steel chains. Megan froze in her tracks, her smug expression instantly melting into utter confusion. "Excuse me!" she shouted, marching up to the men in her designer athletic wear. "You cannot park that ugly truck here. You are blocking my exit. Move it right now." The lead driver, a burly man who clearly had zero patience for entitled socialites, barely looked at her. He checked the paperwork on his clipboard and marched straight toward the Porsche. "We are not blocking anything, lady," he replied gruffly. "We are here for the vehicle. Authorized pickup from the owner." Megan shrieked in disbelief. "What are you talking about? I am driving this car. You are not touching it." She stepped in front of the vehicle, crossing her arms as if her tiny frame could stop a flatbed tow truck. That was when I pressed a button on the wall panel, automatically opening the large front doors so my voice could carry outside. Nina pushed my wheelchair onto the front portico. "Step away from the vehicle, Megan," I commanded, my voice echoing across the manicured lawn. "The men are doing exactly what they were hired to do." Megan spun around, her face contorted in shock. "Tobias, what is going on? Tell these men to leave immediately." "I sold it," I replied simply. "I called the exotic car dealership late last night from my hospital bed and signed over the title digitally. They wired the funds directly into my private trust account this morning. The transaction is complete. The car is no longer mine, and it is certainly not yours." The drivers wasted no time. They efficiently hooked the chains to the undercarriage and began winching the beautiful, pristine sports car up the steep incline of the flatbed. Megan watched in absolute horror as her temporary status symbol was literally dragged away from her. "You sold it," she gasped, her voice cracking. "You sold a classic car just to spite me." "I did not sell it to spite you, Megan," I corrected her, staring coldly into her panicked eyes. I sold it because I am cleaning house. I am liquidating assets I no longer need and cutting deadweight. Consider it a preview of things to come." Megan completely lost whatever fragile grip she had on her sanity. She threw her expensive gym bag onto the manicured grass and began screaming at the top of her lungs, stomping her feet in a spectacular display of childish fury right in the middle of the lawn for all the wealthy neighbors to see. The commotion drew Devin out of the house. He burst through the front doors, his face twisted in raw, furious anger when he saw the tow truck driving away with the Porsche. "You are humiliating my wife, Dad," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You have completely lost your mind." I simply turned my wheelchair around and let Nina push me back inside, shutting the heavy doors on their pathetic screaming match. But the war was far from over. Out on the lawn, Devin pulled his phone from his pocket, his eyes dark and desperate. "I am calling the private doctor right now," he hissed to Megan. "We are doing this today. He belongs in a facility." Barely 2 hours had passed since the tow truck hauled my pristine sports car down the driveway when the front doorbell rang. I was resting in my study, my injured leg propped up on a velvet ottoman while Nina checked my vitals. Devin marched into the room leading a tall, unusually slick man carrying a leather medical bag. He did not look like any respected physician I had ever encountered in my decades of corporate networking. "Mr. Wright," the man said, flashing a perfectly bleached smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am Dr. Simon Reed. Your son called me here today because he is deeply concerned about your cognitive recovery following your recent vehicular trauma." Without asking for permission, he pulled up a chair directly in front of me and pulled out a notepad. Before I could even inquire about his medical credentials, he launched into a rapid-fire barrage of bizarrely specific and entirely loaded questions. He did not ask about the pain in my fractured ribs or the healing progress of my leg. Instead, he asked me to recall the exact date of my wife's passing, the specific routing numbers for my corporate accounts, and the details of conversations I supposedly had yesterday. When I paused to gauge his angle, he immediately tried to twist my silence. "Do you often find yourself losing track of time, Tobias?" He pressed his pen, hovering over his notepad. "Devin mentioned you have been making highly irrational financial decisions today. It is completely normal for a man of your advanced age to experience severe neurological decline after a major physical shock. We just want to get you the specialized facility care you need." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, but out of the corner of my eye I spotted Megan hovering in the hallway just outside the open double doors of my study. She was pacing back and forth, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, constantly peeking in to monitor the interrogation. She was treating my medical assessment like a high-stakes performance, tapping her manicured nails against the door frame in a clear display of aggressive impatience. "Doctor, you need to document how aggressive he has been acting," Megan chimed in loudly, stepping just over the threshold. "He literally sold a highly valuable family asset this morning for absolutely no logical reason. He is clearly not in his right mind. He is putting our entire family estate at risk with his sudden paranoid delusions." Dr. Reed nodded sympathetically at her, completely ignoring standard patient confidentiality protocols. He scribbled furiously on his notepad, making exaggerated sighs as if my condition was a tragic, irreversible reality. I could see the dark ink forming completely fabricated conclusions. He was not writing down my coherent responses. He was selectively documenting any slight hesitation, translating my physical exhaustion from the broken bones into evidence of severe mental deterioration. "I see exactly what you mean, Megan," the corrupt doctor replied smoothly, adjusting his expensive glasses. "The trauma from the collision has clearly exacerbated an underlying cognitive decline. Post-concussive dementia is a very real threat. In these advanced stages, patients often display immense hostility toward their primary caregivers. They make reckless financial decisions and push away the people trying to protect them. It is a textbook case of diminished capacity." Devin stood behind the doctor, nodding with a sickeningly grave expression on his face. "We just want what is best for him." Dr. Reed, Devin lied, his voice dripping with artificial sorrow. "We have been looking into a premium assisted living facility upstate. They have a secure memory care unit that can prevent him from harming himself or our family business. We just need your professional medical certification to initiate the transfer of power." Dr. Reed tapped his pen against the paper, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Based on my preliminary assessment, I believe we have more than enough grounds to proceed with a declaration of incompetence. I will finalize the medical affidavit tonight." Megan let out a loud, audible sigh of relief from the hallway, her posture instantly relaxing, as if she had just won the lottery. They actually thought they had checkmated me right inside my own home. I knew exactly what I needed to do. If I fought back and demonstrated my sharp intellect right then, they would simply regroup and find a more aggressive way to corner me. I needed to give them enough rope to hang themselves completely. So I decided to play the exact role they were paying this fraudulent doctor to document. I let my shoulders slump forward slightly, altering my posture to mimic a defeated, exhausted old man. I allowed my gaze to drift toward the window, staring blankly at the oak trees outside. I rubbed my temples as if the medication was clouding my thoughts. "What day is it?" I murmured, keeping my voice low and slightly raspy. "I need to go to the logistics warehouse. Camille is waiting for me to review the shipping manifests." Mentioning my late wife as if she were still alive in the present tense was the perfect bait. Devin and Megan exchanged a thrilled, victorious glance. Dr. Reed quickly jotted down a final note, snapping his leather binder shut with a definitive thud. "Do not worry about the warehouse, Dad," Devin said, his tone thick with condescending pity. "I am taking over the company now. You just need to rest." Dr. Reed stood up, packing his medical bag. "I have seen enough," he announced to my son. "The cognitive deterioration is progressing rapidly. I will have the final incompetence certification couriered to your lawyer by tomorrow morning." They ushered the doctor out of the study, patting each other on the back like criminals finalizing a successful heist. The moment the heavy front door clicked shut, the facade of the confused old man instantly vanished from my face. I sat up perfectly straight, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs. I looked over at my nurse, who was quietly standing by the bookshelf. "Nina," I said sharply, "did you get all of it?" Nina stepped forward, her professional demeanor completely unfazed. She reached into the oversized pocket of her medical scrubs and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen, saving the high-definition audio recording she had been running since the moment Dr. Reed stepped into the room. "Every single word, Mr. Wright," she confirmed, handing the device to me, "including the part where your daughter-in-law openly instructed him to falsify your aggressive behavior." I took the phone and immediately dialed Gregory Thorne. My lawyer picked up on the second ring. "Gregory," I said, my voice echoing with cold, calculated authority. "Devin and Megan just brought a hired gun into my home posing as a medical professional. His name is Dr. Simon Reed. I need you to run a comprehensive background check on him immediately. Dig into his medical license, his financial history, and any past malpractice suits. They are trying to build a fabricated case to lock me in a memory care ward and seize my assets." Gregory let out a low whistle over the line. "I am on it, Tobias. I will tear this guy apart and get back to you before dinner." I spent the rest of the afternoon resting in my study, listening to the faint sounds of Devin and Megan celebrating their perceived victory in the west wing of the house. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted a man who had survived 4 decades of cutthroat corporate warfare. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the manicured lawn when my private line rang. It was Gregory. I answered immediately, expecting an update on the corrupt doctor. Tobias, Gregory said, his voice lacking its usual calm cadence, replaced instead by a tone of urgent severity. "Dr. Reed is a complete fraud whose medical license was suspended in 2 states for accepting illegal kickbacks. But that is not why I am calling you with such urgency right now. We have a much bigger problem on our hands." "What did they do?" Gregory, I asked, gripping the armrest of my wheelchair. "Megan did not just bring that fake doctor to your house," Gregory revealed, taking a sharp breath. "She went straight to the regional hospital network database this afternoon. She just submitted a comprehensive medical power of attorney, granting Devin full legal authority over your healthcare and residential placement. Tobias, she completely forged your signature on a federal medical document. The revelation of the forged medical document was a declaration of total war. I did not wait for the morning to confront the reality of their betrayal, and neither did my attorney." Gregory drove straight to my estate under the cover of darkness, slipping through the service entrance that Nina had discreetly unlocked. He bypassed the areas of the mansion where Devin and Megan were celebrating their supposed victory and walked directly into my private study. His face was a mask of grim professionalism, but his eyes betrayed a deep, simmering outrage on my behalf. "The medical power of attorney was just the smokescreen, Tobias," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper as he pulled a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. "While they were busy trying to convince a corrupt doctor to lock you away in a memory care ward, they were simultaneously raiding your corporate vault." He handed me a stack of highly classified banking statements flagged with red urgent markers from our primary lending institution. I adjusted my reading glasses and stared at the numbers. The ink on the page felt like a physical blow to my chest. Just 3 weeks prior, Devon had exploited his nominal title as vice president to take out a massive commercial mortgage against one of my most valuable logistics warehouses. He had leveraged a prime piece of real estate that I had purchased with cash decades ago, using it as collateral to secure a staggering $500,000 loan. I flipped through the transaction logs, tracing the path of the stolen funds with the surgical precision of a man who had spent 40 years hunting down corporate discrepancies. The $500,000 did not go toward fleet upgrades. It did not go toward employee payroll or expanding our shipping routes. Instead, the entire lump sum was wired directly into an obscure limited liability company registered just 2 states over. "Who owns this shell corporation?" Gregory the First asked, feeling my jaw clench so tightly my teeth ached. My lawyer pulled out a secondary dossier containing a background check. The sole proprietor is a man named Kyle. He is Megan's older brother. The pieces of their sickening puzzle snapped together with terrifying clarity. Kyle was a notorious smooth-talking grifter who styled himself as a tech entrepreneur, but had a long documented history of driving imaginary startups straight into bankruptcy. Devon and Megan had not just embezzled $500,000 of my hard-earned corporate assets. They had funneled my blood and sweat directly into a fraudulent phantom startup to fund a lavish lifestyle for her incredibly entitled family. They were systematically bleeding my legacy dry, convinced that I would soon be rotting in a psychiatric facility, completely unable to stop them. Megan was essentially using my fortune to elevate her middle-class relatives into the ranks of the elite, treating my logistics empire like her own personal piggy bank. I stared at the signature on the loan agreement. Devon had forged my initials on the secondary authorization line, a sloppy, desperate imitation of my handwriting. They thought they had perfectly orchestrated the ultimate heist. They believed they were brilliant, untouchable masterminds. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass against the wall or give in to the blinding rage that was demanding to be released. In the ruthless world of commercial real estate and corporate logistics, anger makes you sloppy, but cold, calculated patience makes you lethal. "Gregory," I said, my voice echoing with absolute icy precision in the quiet study, "I want you to immediately contact the commercial lending board at the bank. You will invoke the unauthorized action clause hidden in our corporate charter. Inform them that Devon acted entirely outside his fiduciary capacity and strictly without the consent of the board of directors." My lawyer smiled, a sharp, predatory grin forming on his face. "You want me to pull the parent company's guarantor status on the mortgage?" he confirmed, already typing the directive into his encrypted tablet. "Exactly," I replied, folding my hands on my desk. "The moment my logistics firm officially disavows that $500,000 loan, the bank will panic. They will instantly reclassify the mortgage from a secure corporate asset into a high-risk, unsecured personal liability. Without my company backing the funds, that $500,000 immediately transforms into Devon's massive, toxic personal debt. He has no real assets of his own to use as collateral. His sports cars, his luxury condo, his designer watches, all of it legally belongs to my trust. The bank will trigger an automatic default and demand immediate full repayment within 24 hours. I was setting a financial time bomb directly under his custom-tailored suit, and he had absolutely no idea the timer had just started ticking. The next afternoon, while I was resting in my wheelchair by the grand window overlooking the gardens, Brenda, the spy maid Megan had hired, walked into my room. She held a heavy, gold-embossed envelope between her fingers, handing it to me with a dismissive smirk before leaving without a word. I broke the wax seal and pulled out a piece of premium cardstock. It was a formal invitation to an extravagant high-society dinner party taking place this upcoming Saturday night. The venue listed was my own mansion. Megan was hosting a lavish gathering to show off her newfound power, and the guests of honor were none other than her biological parents. She intended to parade them around my estate, boasting about the massive startup funding her brother had just received and silently celebrating their impending takeover of my entire fortune. I carefully folded the invitation and placed it in my lap, a dark, genuinely satisfied smile crossing my face. I would gladly attend her little celebration. Saturday evening arrived with the obnoxious hum of luxury vehicles pulling up my winding driveway. Megan had transformed my elegant, understated home into a gaudy spectacle, complete with a string quartet and waitstaff serving expensive champagne she could no longer afford. I sat quietly in my wheelchair near the grand fireplace, observing the circus with the keen eye of a hawk watching its prey. Soon the guests of honor made their grand entrance. Megan's parents, Richard and Patricia, strutted into the foyer wearing outfits that screamed new money and desperation. They were a middle-class couple who had always harbored a quiet, toxic disdain for my background, masking their prejudice behind fake smiles and forced politeness. When they spotted me sitting in the corner with my cast and medical brace, their eyes gleamed with a sickening mixture of pity and arrogant triumph. Patricia drifted over her heavy perfume preceding her and patted my shoulder as if I were a confused stray dog. "Oh, Tobias," she cooed, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "It is so tragic to see you like this. Megan told us all about your little cognitive struggles and how hard it has been for you to remember basic things. Do not worry, you are in good hands now. We will make sure you are comfortable in your final years." Richard stood beside her, sipping a glass of my vintage scotch, looking down his nose at me with blatant disrespect. He surveyed my mansion with greedy, calculating eyes, already mentally measuring the drapes and claiming ownership of the legacy I had built with my bare hands. I simply nodded, absorbing their insults, fueling the fire of my impending retaliation. The evening progressed into a lavish sit-down dinner in the formal dining room. I insisted on joining them at the table, taking my rightful place at the head, much to Megan's visible irritation. As the courses were served, Richard's voice grew louder, fueled by the expensive alcohol and his own inflated ego. He dominated the conversation, making sure every guest in the room heard about the glorious future his family was stepping into. He leaned back in his mahogany chair, gesturing grandly with his crystal glass. "You know, everyone, it truly is a new era," Richard announced, casting a condescending glance in my direction. "We have to acknowledge when it is time to pass the torch to the younger, more capable generation. Devon is stepping up to take full control of the logistics empire. It takes a sharp, modern mind to navigate today's corporate landscape, and frankly, it is a massive relief that he is finally steering the ship away from outdated business models." Megan beamed, reaching over to squeeze Devon's hand, playing the role of the proud, supportive wife. But Richard was not finished. He wanted to ensure his ultimate victory was broadcast to the entire room. In fact, he continued puffing out his chest. Devon has already proven his exceptional business acumen. Just this week, he finalized a massive $500,000 capital injection into my son Kyle's new tech startup. It is a brilliant synergistic partnership. Kyle has the visionary ideas, and Devon brings the heavy financial backing of the right estate. That $500,000 is going to revolutionize the industry, and it guarantees our family's absolute financial supremacy for decades to come. Devon sat there soaking in the praise, looking incredibly smug in his tailored suit. He genuinely believed he was the master of the universe. He had no idea that he was sitting on a mountain of high-yield explosives. Richard raised his glass high in the air, a triumphant smirk plastered across his face. "So let us propose a toast. To Devon, to Kyle's brilliant startup, and to the merging of our families into one unstoppable financial powerhouse." The guests murmured their polite agreements, raising their glasses in unison. I did not raise mine. I simply sat there, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their delusion, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the air in the room feel heavy and uncomfortable. I slowly picked up my porcelain teacup, took a measured sip of Earl Grey, and set it back down on the saucer with a soft, deliberate clink. The sound cut through the ambient chatter, drawing every eye at the table toward me. "That is a truly fascinating investment strategy, Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the dining room with absolute terrifying clarity. "I must congratulate you and Kyle on securing such a substantial amount of capital. It takes real audacity to launch a startup with $500,000 in illegally borrowed funds." Richard scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It is not borrowed, Tobias. It is a strategic corporate allocation. Devon utilized the company's asset portfolio to back the venture. It is completely secure and entirely above board." I offered a cold, predatory smile, leaning forward slightly in my wheelchair. "That is where you are tragically misinformed, Richard. You see, a corporate allocation requires the explicit authorization of the board of directors and the signature of the primary shareholder. I am the sole primary shareholder. What Devon actually did was commit commercial mortgage fraud. He attempted to leverage a warehouse using forged documents to secure a personal loan under the false pretense of corporate backing." Devon's face drained of all color. He dropped his fork, the silver clattering loudly against his expensive china plate. "Dad, what are you doing?" he hissed, his eyes darting frantically around the room at the silent, staring guests. "I am simply clarifying the new era of this family's finances, Devon," I replied, never breaking eye contact with his terrified father-in-law. I instructed my legal counsel to contact the Commercial Lending Board yesterday afternoon. The logistics firm has officially disavowed any knowledge or backing of that transaction. We pulled our guarantor status completely. Richard's smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. "What does that mean?" he stammered, his grip tightening on his wine glass. "It means Richard." I explained with lethal precision that the bank instantly reclassified that $500,000 from a secure commercial mortgage into a toxic, high-risk, unsecured personal liability belonging solely to Devon. And since Devon does not actually own any of the assets he claims to possess, the bank has triggered an automatic default. That $500,000 is no longer an investment in your son's imaginary tech company. It is a massive, immediately payable debt. I took another calm sip of my tea. The commercial lending department opens at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning. At exactly 1 minute past 8, they will officially call in the loan. If Devon does not produce $500,000 in liquid cash by the end of the business day, they will begin seizing everything, including the funds already transferred to your son. The blood completely left Richard and Patricia's faces, leaving them looking like chalk-white ghosts in the middle of the lavish dining room. Megan gasped, pressing both hands over her mouth as the devastating reality of my words crashed down upon her meticulously planned evening. The opulent dinner party they had orchestrated to celebrate my downfall had just become the grand stage for their absolute ruin. The smug superiority they had paraded around my home evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating dread. Before Richard could even formulate a coherent response or attempt to defend his son's fraudulent company, the silence in the room was violently shattered. Devon's smartphone, resting on the table next to his plate, began to vibrate and emit a series of loud, harsh notification chimes. He picked it up with trembling hands, his breath hitching in his throat. His eyes widened in sheer terror as he stared at the glowing screen. It was not just one alert. It was a relentless cascade of automated messages from his primary financial institution. The bank was not waiting for tomorrow morning. They were already initiating the emergency asset freezes. His accounts were locking down one by one in real time, confirming every single word I had just spoken and sealing their impending financial doom. The grand-grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, echoing through the newly silent mansion. The extravagant dinner party had dissolved hours ago, ending in a chaotic mass exodus of horrified guests and humiliated in-laws. I was resting in my ground-floor master suite, the faint glow of the reading lamp illuminating the medical brace around my ribs. My eyes were closed, but I was wide awake, anticipating the inevitable fallout. The heavy oak door to my bedroom did not just open. It was violently kicked inward, crashing against the wall with a thunderous slam that rattled the picture frames. Devon stormed into the room, his tailored suit jacket discarded, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot wide with a feral, desperate panic that had completely consumed his arrogant composure. He marched straight to the edge of my bed and forcefully threw a crumpled stack of legal documents onto my quilt. "Sign it," he roared, his chest heaving as he pointed a trembling finger at the pages. "Sign the financial reinstatement and the power of attorney right now. The bank is already preparing to seize the corporate accounts, and they are threatening to liquidate my personal assets by morning if I do not produce the $500,000. You have to fix this, Dad. You cannot just let them destroy my life over a simple business maneuver." I looked down at the desperate paperwork and then up at my son, my expression entirely unmoved by his midnight theatrics. Before I could even issue a verbal refusal, Megan burst through the open doorway. She had stripped off her designer gown and was wearing a silk robe, her face smeared with ruined makeup and tracks of mascara running down her cheeks. She did not possess the same frantic, aggressive energy as her husband. Instead, she weaponized her tears, immediately launching into a hysterical performance designed to paint herself as the ultimate victim. "You are a monster, Tobias!" she shrieked, clutching the doorframe as if she might collapse from the sheer weight of my cruelty. "You are deliberately trying to destroy our marriage and ruin my family. My brother is going to lose his company tomorrow morning because of your petty, vindictive games." She stepped further into the room, her voice reaching a shrill, ear-piercing pitch. "You have never wanted us to be happy. You have hated me from the absolute second Devon introduced us. You sit in this massive mansion hoarding your millions while acting like we are criminals for wanting a piece of the pie. You are selfish and bitter. You are just jealous because Devon managed to build a beautiful life with me instead of marrying someone you picked out for him." Megan stepped closer to the bed, her tears flowing freely now as she played her most pathetic card. "Do not think I do not know what this is really about, Tobias. You are prejudiced against me. You have always judged my family because we are white and middle class. You look down on us because we do not have your corporate pedigree. You resent me because I am not a carbon copy of your late wife, Camille. You could never accept that your successful black son chose to build his life with a white woman, so you are using your money to punish us both for it. You want to see Devin fail just so you can drag him back under your total control. She fell to her knees at the side of the bed, gripping the edge of my mattress, sobbing uncontrollably. Please, Tobias, just sign the paper. She begged, her voice muffled by the blankets. Do not send us to prison. Do not let them take everything away from us. We just wanted to build a legacy. We just wanted to make you proud. I sat up slowly, ignoring the sharp ache in my fractured ribs. I picked up the stack of legal documents Devin had thrown onto my bed. I did not reach for a pen. I gripped the thick parchment in both hands, and with a single deliberate motion, I tore the power of attorney straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper cut through Megan's theatrical sobbing, bringing a dead silence to the room. I let the torn halves flutter to the floor. Do not ever invoke Camille's name in this house again, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that made Devin involuntarily step back. And do not dare to use your race as a convenient shield for your parasitic greed, Megan. My disdain for you has absolutely nothing to do with the color of your skin or your middle-class background. I despise you because you are a shallow, manipulative leech who views my son as nothing more than a human ATM and views me as an obstacle to an inheritance you did not earn. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees, locking eyes with the sobbing woman on the floor. You talk about building a legacy, but you have never built a single thing in your entire life. You masquerade as a high society socialite using the wealth that a black man and woman built from nothing, all while secretly looking down on the very hands that feed you. You invited your arrogant parents into my home so they could insult my intelligence and count my money while I was sitting in a wheelchair. You pushed my son to commit federal mortgage fraud to fund your brother's imaginary tech company. You are not a victim, Megan. You are a highly calculated thief who finally got caught with her hand in the vault. I turned my attention back to Devin, who was staring at the torn documents on the floor in absolute horror. You wanted to play the role of a high-rolling corporate executive, Devin, I told him coldly. Well, congratulations. You are now experiencing the real corporate world. Actions have consequences. Signatures have binding legal weight. And committing fraud against a commercial bank carries federal prison time. You made your bed with this woman and her grifter family. Now you are going to lie in it without my checkbook to shield you. Get out of my bedroom. Get out of my sight. And figure out how you are going to survive 8 in the morning when the bank officially calls in your $500,000 debt. Realizing that their manipulation tactics and aggressive demands had completely failed, Devin and Megan backed away from the bed. The terrifying reality of their imminent financial ruin had finally extinguished their false bravado. Megan scrambled to her feet, her tears instantly drying up as her survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed Devin by the arm and pulled him out of the room without another word. Less than 20 minutes later, I heard the distinct sound of their remaining car tires screeching down the long asphalt driveway. They were fleeing into the dead of night. I sat back against my pillows, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. A soft knock broke the silence, and Nina stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. "Mr. Wright," she said, her voice urgent but tightly controlled. "I just checked the safe in the West Wing office." Devin bypassed the security code before they left. He stole the original deed to the suburban villa where they currently live. He took the physical property title with him. The sun had barely risen over the estate when my private line rang. It was Gregory Thorne. His voice was razor-sharp, immediately cutting through the early morning quiet. "Tobias, we have a massive development," Gregory announced. Nina was absolutely correct about the missing property deed. Devin did not just steal the physical paperwork to hold on to it as leverage. He is actively trying to liquidate the suburban villa. He spent the last 4 hours frantically contacting bottom-feeding real estate investors who specialize in rapid, off-market cash acquisitions. He is trying to offload a $2 million luxury property for a fraction of its actual market value just to get his hands on immediate liquid cash to satisfy the commercial bank before they completely obliterate him. He knows he does not officially own the house, but he possesses the original deed and shares your exact last name. He is setting up a fraudulent transfer of ownership, expecting to pocket the cash and vanish before the new buyers or the state registrar realize the title is completely illegitimate. He has found a shady cash buyer willing to close the deal by tomorrow afternoon, no questions asked. I listened to the rapid clicking of Gregory typing on his keyboard. I am drafting the police report right now. Tobias. Gregory continued, his tone shifting into full prosecution mode. We need to dispatch local authorities to his location immediately. If we alert the fraud division, we can have Devon intercepted and arrested for attempted grand larceny and possession of stolen documents before he even gets close to a closing table. We can shut this entire circus down by lunch. I took a deep breath, staring out the window at the dew-covered grass of my lawn. The protective, fatherly instinct that had governed my life for 38 years briefly flickered in my chest, but I ruthlessly extinguished it. No, Gregory, I commanded, my voice echoing with an unnerving calm. Do not call the police. Do not intercept him. Let him proceed with the sale. The line went dead silent. Gregory was a seasoned cutthroat attorney, but even he was momentarily stunned by my directive. Tobias, he said carefully, if he signs that transfer, he is committing federal real estate fraud. He is crossing a legal line that carries mandatory minimum sentencing. We are talking about years in a federal penitentiary. I know exactly what line he is crossing, Gregory was replied, gripping the armrests of my wheelchair. For his entire life, I have acted as Devon's safety net. Every time he made a mistake, every time he failed, I swooped in and paid the price to shield him from the consequences. That is precisely why he is so comfortable stealing from me now. He genuinely believes that deep down, I will always intervene before he actually destroys his life. He thinks I will stop him. I am not going to stop him this time. If I call the police now, he gets arrested for an attempt. He will claim he was just having the property appraised or some other pathetic lie, and Megan will play the victim to a sympathetic jury. I want him to sign his name on the dotted line. I want him to cross the point of absolute no return. Let him forge my signature on the transfer documents and hand over the deed. Gregory let out a low, appreciative breath. He understood the lethal nature of my strategy. You want to build an airtight federal case that no high-priced defense attorney could ever dismantle, he confirmed. Exactly, I said. I want you to utilize your contacts in the state property registry. Find out exactly which notary and which title company Devon is using to facilitate this under-the-table transaction. Do not block the sale. Instead, I want you to ensure the paperwork glides through the system without raising any preliminary red flags. Have your associates monitor the transaction from the inside. Let the notary stamp the forged documents. Let the wire transfer process initiate. Once that ink dries on the fraudulent contract, his crime becomes an undeniable matter of federal record. We are going to let him lock himself inside his own prison cell. Gregory did not hesitate. I will make the calls immediately, Tobias. I have a senior contact at the title registry office who can quietly flag the specific transaction and allow it to process while simultaneously generating an alert for the federal authorities. Devon will think he pulled off the perfect crime, but he will actually be creating a legally binding confession of grand larceny. The meticulous planning required a cold heart, but my son had already frozen mine. I spent the remainder of the day in my study reviewing the corporate restructuring files while Nina monitored my vitals. I felt a profound sense of clarity. Devon and Megan thought they were outsmarting an injured old man. They thought they were moving with stealth and speed. In reality, they were simply walking down a brightly lit corridor directly into the steel jaws of a trap I was holding open for them. Every step they took was monitored. Every desperate decision they made was anticipated and weaponized against them. By late afternoon, Gregory called back to confirm the bait was set. Devon had scheduled the closing for the following morning at a discreet title office downtown. The forged documents were ready, and the unsuspecting cash buyer had already initiated the escrow transfer. Devon was hours away from finalizing his own destruction. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my study, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen, expecting another update from Gregory. Instead, it was a text message from Megan. Clearly emboldened by the prospect of the impending millions from the illegal house sale, she had decided to play her most despicable card yet. Her message was dripping with venom and supreme arrogance. "We are securing our own funding, Tobias," the text read. "You thought you could starve us out, but you failed. Since you want to act like a ruthless dictator, you can face the consequences. Do not ever expect to see your 7-year-old grandson again. I am blocking your number and banning you from his school. If you ever want to see his face or be a part of his life, you will unlock those black cards and wire $2 million into my personal account by tomorrow noon. Consider it a late inheritance fee." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the ultimate extortion attempt. She was weaponizing an innocent child. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the venomous words burning into my retinas. Megan was not just threatening to keep my 7-year-old grandson away for a weekend. She followed up her initial text with a blazing voice message detailing exactly how she planned to erase me from his life completely. She boasted that once the suburban villa sale closed tomorrow morning, she would take the illicit cash and fly directly to Paris, dragging my grandson across the Atlantic with her. "You will never hear his voice again, Tobias," she hissed through the speaker, her tone dripping with malicious glee. "I will legally change his last name. I will enroll him in an international boarding school under my maiden name, and I will make sure he grows up believing his grandfather was a cruel, senile old man who abandoned him. You have 24 hours to wire those $2 million into my personal offshore account. If you do not comply, your legacy ends with you." She was using an innocent child, her own flesh and blood, as a human shield to extort me. It was the ultimate act of cowardice, a desperate, despicable pivot from a woman who realized her financial lifeline had been brutally severed. She thought this emotional terrorism would finally break me. A few moments later, my private line rang loudly, cutting through the quiet of my study. I answered it, maintaining my absolute silence. Devin was on the other end, his voice dripping with a newfound disgusting confidence. He genuinely believed they had finally backed me into an inescapable corner. "Listen to my wife, Dad," Devin commanded, trying to mimic the authoritative tone I had used in boardrooms for 40 years. "You thought you could outsmart us by freezing the bank accounts and manipulating the commercial lending board. You thought you were 10 steps ahead of everyone else, but you forgot one crucial detail. You care deeply about the family name. You care about your bloodline. My son is the only heir to the right legacy, and Megan and I hold complete custody over him. If you refuse to unlock those black cards and wire the $2 million immediately, we will vanish without a trace. You will spend the last few years of your pathetic life completely alone in that massive empty mansion, knowing your only grandson does not even remember what you look like." Devin let out an arrogant scoff, fully convinced he held the ultimate trump card. "You have always been a ruthless businessman, Dad, but you have a soft spot for the boy. I know you do. You cannot stand the thought of losing him. So drop the tough guy act, call Gregory Thorne, and authorize the transfer. Consider it the price of admission to stay in your grandson's life." It was sickening to hear my own son use his child as a bargaining chip. He viewed his son not as a person to be loved and protected, but as leverage in a financial hostage negotiation. Devin had grossly miscalculated the situation. He assumed my love for my grandson translated into a willingness to be extorted by two criminals. He thought this threat would break my spirit and force me to capitulate to their ridiculous demands. Instead, it only solidified my resolve to utterly destroy them. They were trying to manipulate me with the one thing I held sacred, proving once and for all that they possessed no moral boundaries whatsoever. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of negotiation. I simply listened to his arrogant demands, letting the silence stretch until Devin grew incredibly uncomfortable. "We are waiting for the wire transfer notification." He finally snapped his false bravado, wavering slightly under the weight of my total silence. "You have until noon tomorrow." He hung up the phone, believing he had delivered a fatal blow. I placed the phone gently on my mahogany desk, turning my wheelchair toward the large portrait of my late wife, Camille, hanging above the ornate fireplace. Her warm, intelligent eyes seemed to look right through me, reminding me of a solemn promise we made to each other 5 years ago, just weeks before cancer took her from me. Camille had always seen through Devin's superficial charm. She knew our son was inherently weak, prone to taking the easy way out, and easily manipulated by flashy, hollow people like Megan. "Tobias," she had whispered from her hospice bed, her grip incredibly strong despite her failing health. "You must protect the corporate legacy, but more importantly, you must protect our grandson. Do not let Devin ruin that boy's future to fund his own arrogant mistakes. Build a financial fortress around him. I made that vow to my dying wife, and I had executed it with ruthless legal precision long before this current war began." I picked up my phone and dialed Gregory Thorne once again. "Gregory," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "Devin and Megan have decided to use my grandson as leverage. They are demanding a $2 million ransom under the threat of taking him out of the country. I need you to immediately send them the certified digital copies of the Camille Wright Independent Trust Fund. Send it directly to both of their private email addresses and copy Megan's pretentious parents for good measure. Let them read the fine print of their own failure." Gregory chuckled darkly on the other end of the line. "Sending it right now, Tobias." They are going to have an absolute meltdown when they see the clauses. 3 years ago, I established an ironclad, irrevocable trust fund solely in my grandson's name. It contained a massive 8-figure sum, enough to guarantee he would attend any prestigious university he chose and never have to worry about a mortgage for the rest of his life. But it came with a meticulously crafted catch. The trust was entirely locked down until his 25th birthday. Neither Devin nor Megan had any legal authority to access, borrow against, or withdraw a single cent from that fund. Furthermore, I had appointed Gregory and an independent board of ruthless financial fiduciaries to oversee it. If Devin or Megan attempted to dispute it, challenge custody, or flee the country with the boy, a fail-safe clause would immediately trigger freezing all secondary family assets and alerting federal child welfare authorities to a potential kidnapping risk. I was not just calling their bluff. I was legally neutralizing their only weapon. Exactly 12 minutes later, my phone vibrated with a delivery receipt. They had opened the email and read the trust documents. The profound silence that followed from their end was the sweetest sound I had heard all week. Their grand extortion attempt had just slammed into an impenetrable brick wall of elite corporate law. They realized they could not touch a dime of the boy's fortune, and taking him out of the country would now trigger a massive federal manhunt. Stripped of his leverage, cornered by his impending $500,000 bank default, and realizing the suburban villa sale would not clear fast enough to save him, Devin's panic hit a fever pitch. Driven by sheer blinding desperation, he made the most catastrophic decision of his life. Nina received an urgent alert from our internal corporate security team. Devin had just violently peeled out of his driveway, speeding directly toward the logistics company headquarters. He was heading straight for the executive vaults, intending to use his remaining administrative access to physically drain the employee union cash reserves before the morning sun rose. The sun had barely begun to paint the city skyline when Devin drove his sports car recklessly into the VIP parking garage of my logistics headquarters. According to the live security feed Nina monitored from my tablet, my son marched through the glass atrium with the frantic, manic energy of a cornered animal trying desperately to play the apex predator. He bypassed the front desk entirely, flashing his vice president badge at the early morning security staff, who simply stepped aside per my strict prearranged orders. Devin took the executive elevator straight to the top floor, his mind entirely consumed by the desperate need to secure the employee union cash reserves before his $500,000 loan defaulted. He burst through the heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom where the primary corporate vault was secured. Our chief financial officer, Marcus, was already standing near the digital keypad, holding a stack of leather-bound ledgers. "Open it," Devin barked, his voice echoing sharply across the vast, empty conference table. He did not ask politely. He demanded, straightening his tie in a pathetic attempt to project authority. "I need an immediate withdrawal of $300,000 in untraceable funds for an emergency operational expenditure. Open the vault right now, Marcus. I am operating under executive privilege, and I do not have time for bureaucratic delays." Devin crossed his arms, tapping his expensive Italian leather shoes against the polished hardwood floor, completely oblivious to the trap that had already snapped shut around his ankles. He genuinely believed his hollow title still commanded respect within these walls. Marcus did not move a single muscle toward the vault keypad. Instead, he simply lowered his ledgers and looked past my son. The boardroom was dimly lit, the heavy motorized blinds still drawn shut against the morning sun. At the far end of the long mahogany table, the oversized leather chairman chair was turned entirely away from the room, facing the sprawling panoramic view of the city. Devin noticed Marcus hesitating, and his face twisted with sudden entitled rage. "Did you not hear me?" Devin snapped, taking a threatening step forward. "I am the vice president of this company, and I am giving you a direct order to open that safe immediately." Slowly, the heavy leather chair began to swivel around. The quiet, mechanical hum of the rotating base was the only sound in the cavernous room. Devin froze, his arrogant posture instantly collapsing as the chair completed its rotation. I was sitting there directly in the center of my own corporate fortress. I was not wearing a flimsy hospital gown. I was not confined to my wheelchair, groaning in pain from fractured ribs. I was dressed in a pristine charcoal gray bespoke suit, leaning forward with my hands steeped on the mahogany table, projecting an aura of absolute, unyielding authority. The medical brace was hidden seamlessly beneath my tailored clothing, and my fractured leg rested comfortably out of sight beneath the heavy wooden desk. I looked into my son's eyes with the cold, calculating gaze of a man who had built this empire from dirt, blood, and broken bones. The color drained from Devon's face so fast he looked as though he might collapse right onto the expensive Persian rug. "Dad," he stammered, taking a clumsy step backward, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. "You are supposed to be on bed rest. You are supposed to be trapped at the house." He looked wildly around the room, finally noticing that Marcus was not alone. From the shadows of the adjoining executive lounge, Gregory Thorne stepped out holding a thick binder of legal documents. Beside him stood the entire executive board of directors, men and women who had fought in the corporate trenches with me and Camille for decades. They had been standing there in absolute silence, bearing witness to Devon attempting to rob the working-class employees who kept this company running. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, suffocating, and deafening. It was the heavy, terrifying quiet of a predator trapping its prey in an inescapable corner. Devon swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between the vault, the board members, and my steely expression. He realized in one crushing, humiliating moment that there was no emergency operational expenditure. There was no secret withdrawal. There was only a public, devastating execution of his corporate career, and he had walked right onto the executioner block. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout to make itself heard. Devon Wright. I began every syllable, slicing through the quiet room like a freshly sharpened blade. You have attempted to authorize a fraudulent withdrawal from the Employee Union Reserve Fund to cover a personal commercial default. You have forged my signature to secure a disastrous loan for a phantom startup, and you have continuously leveraged the good name of this company to fund a lavish parasitic lifestyle. Devon opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. His arrogant facade had been entirely atomized, leaving behind a terrified little boy. By unanimous vote of the board of directors, standing right here as witnesses, I continued my gaze, never leaving his panicked eyes. Your employment at this logistics firm is terminated immediately. You are hereby stripped of the vice president title. You are stripped of all executive privileges, access clearances, and corporate representation. You are, as of this exact second, completely unemployed. Devon gasped, a pathetic, desperate sound escaping his throat. "Dad, please, you cannot do this to me in front of everyone," he pleaded, finally shedding his false bravado and begging for mercy. "I am your son. I built this division with you." "You built absolutely nothing," I corrected him, my voice turning into a low, terrifying growl. "You coasted on the sacrifices of a black man and woman who gave you the world, and you repaid us by trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward so you could steal the rest of my legacy." I pressed a silver button on the intercom console resting on my desk. The frosted glass doors of the boardroom slid wide open, revealing the bustling main floor of the headquarters. Hundreds of morning shift employees, managers, and warehouse supervisors stopped dead in their tracks, turning their attention to the executive suite. The employees who had suffered under his arrogant, dismissive management style for years watched with wide, satisfied eyes as the man who constantly belittled them was publicly dethroned. "Place your corporate key card, your company credit cards, and the keys to the company issued." "Range Rover on this table." "Devon," I ordered loudly, ensuring the absolute silence of the entire floor amplified my command. "Right now." Devon looked out at the sea of faces, realizing that his ultimate humiliation was being broadcast to the very people he had spent years treating like garbage. His hands shook violently as he reached into his designer suit, pulling out the glossy black key card and the heavy silver car keys. He dropped them onto the mahogany table, the items clattering loudly against the wood. He had been stripped of his armor, his wealth and his dignity reduced to nothing more than a desperate fraud standing in a borrowed suit. I gave a swift, silent nod to the head of corporate security. Two massive guards stepped forward, grabbing Devon firmly by the arms. They did not guide him gently. They physically dragged him out of the boardroom, marching him through the center of the open office floor. Hundreds of employees watched in absolute silence as the former vice president was hauled toward the service elevators like a common trespasser. Devon struggled helplessly against their grip, his face flushed with tears of pure, unadulterated shame. As soon as he was shoved out the front glass doors and onto the cold concrete of the street, he scrambled to pull his cell phone from his pocket. Completely broken and entirely out of options, he frantically dialed his wife, hoping she could somehow salvage the pieces of their shattered lives. He needed her to execute their suburban villa scam immediately to get the cash they desperately needed to survive. But the phone just rang and rang, echoing endlessly against his ear. Miles away, Megan was not waiting by the phone to comfort her ruined husband. She was sitting in the guest suite of my estate dialing the most ruthless divorce attorney in the state. Devin stumbled out of a cheap rideshare vehicle and dragged his heavy feet up the paved driveway of the suburban villa. Stripped of his company-issued Range Rover and his corporate prestige, he looked like a completely shattered man. The crisp morning air offered no comfort as he pushed through the heavy front door. Megan was already waiting for him in the grand foyer, but she was not there to offer a warm embrace or a sympathetic shoulder to cry on. Her face was twisted into a vicious, ugly snarl. The news of his humiliating public termination had already ripped through their elite social circles like a wildfire. "You absolute incompetent fool," she screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings of the villa. "I just received a text message from a friend at the country club. Everyone in the city knows Tobias threw you out of the building like a common thief. You promised me you had this situation under control. You promised me we were taking over the logistics empire today. Instead, you let an injured old man strip you of your title, your car, and your dignity in front of hundreds of employees." Devin slumped onto the tufted entryway bench, burying his face in his trembling hands. Megan, pacing the marble floor like a caged predator, showed absolutely zero sympathy for her husband. "I tied my youth and my reputation to a powerful vice president," she spat, pacing furiously. "Now I am legally bound to a disgraced unemployed failure who just defaulted on a $500,000 loan. You are completely useless, Devin. You had one job, to outsmart your father, and you failed miserably." Devin finally snapped his head, shooting up from his hands. His own latent anger boiled over, instantly erasing any remaining trace of his defeat. "Do not stand there and act like an innocent victim, Megan," he roared, getting to his feet and pointing a shaking finger directly at her face. "The only reason I am sitting in this massive financial crater is because of you and your grifter brother. I forged my father's name to fund Kyle and his fake tech startup because you manipulated me into doing it. You pushed me to hire that corrupt doctor. You pushed me to confront him in his bedroom last night. We are in this mess together, and you are equally responsible." Megan let out a cold, sharp laugh, crossing her arms tightly over her cashmere sweater. "We are not in anything together anymore, Devin," she replied, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "I am not going down with a sinking ship just because you were too weak to secure your own inheritance." The bitter argument raged through the empty house, completely shattering the fragile illusion of their perfect marriage. They hurled vicious insults, tearing at each other's deepest insecurities and exposing the shallow, materialistic foundation of their relationship. But beneath her screaming, Megan was already calculating a ruthless escape route. While Devin was being escorted out of his corporate headquarters earlier that morning, she had spent hours consulting with a highly aggressive, predatory divorce attorney. She knew Devin was drowning in toxic debt, but she also knew they were scheduled to close the fraudulent cash sale on the suburban villa the very next day. The buyer was bringing a massive cashier check. Megan plotted a brilliantly wicked betrayal. She would play along for just one more night. She would stand by his side at the notary office tomorrow morning, ensure the illegal property transfer went through smoothly, and wait for the funds to clear. The exact second the money was deposited, she planned to file emergency divorce papers, freezing his accounts and claiming half of the illegal real estate profits for herself. She would take the cash, abandon him to face the federal fraud charges entirely alone, and disappear to Paris just as she originally intended. She looked at her husband with absolute contempt. "I am going to pack our bags for tomorrow," she said, her voice dropping to a deceptively calm whisper. "We are going to the title office at 9. We sign the papers, we take the money, and we figure out the rest later." Devin, too exhausted and broken to argue, simply nodded blindly, trusting the woman who was actively plotting his absolute ruin. What Devin and Megan completely failed to realize was that they were plotting their corporate treason inside a property that still legally belonged to my trust. When I purchased the suburban villa years ago, I installed a state-of-the-art smart home security system to protect my investment. The interior surveillance cameras had been deactivated for their privacy, but the central intercom and ambient audio sensors remained fully operational. Sitting in my primary study miles away, I listened to their entire vicious screaming match through the encrypted security feed on my tablet. Nina stood quietly by my desk, monitoring my blood pressure as the high-definition audio streamed into the room. We listened as the argument finally subsided, and the sound of Megan retreating to the master bathroom echoed through the speakers. A moment later, the distinct sound of a phone dialing broke the silence. Megan was calling her divorce attorney back. I want the financial injunction filed the exact second the funds hit the joint account. Megan whispered into the phone, her tone ruthless and calculating. He is walking into that notary office tomorrow completely blind. I will secure my 50% cut of the house sale and leave him holding the bag for the $500,000 corporate debt. Make sure the restraining order is ready so he cannot touch my offshore transfer. I tapped the screen, disconnecting the audio feed. A cold, satisfied smile spread across my face. They were no longer just fighting me. They were actively cannibalizing each other like starved animals. Nina shook her head in sheer disgust as she recorded my vitals on her medical chart. She is going to let him commit federal fraud and then rob him blind the moment the ink dries. Nina noted, her voice laced with professional detachment. It is incredibly vicious. I turned my wheelchair toward the grand window, looking out at the dark, peaceful estate. Let her try, I replied softly. I immediately picked up my phone and dialed Gregory Thorne. Gregory, I said as soon as he answered the line, Megan is planning to divorce Devin and steal half of the fraudulent sale proceeds tomorrow morning. I want to make sure she is sitting right next to him when the trap springs shut. Finalize all the arrangements with the federal authorities and the title company manager. We are moving in for the kill. I want every single exit heavily guarded, and I want absolute silence until the pen hits the paper. Gregory chuckled darkly. Everything is perfectly in place, Tobias. The sun rose the following morning, casting a bright, deceptive light over the city. Inside the suburban villa, Devin and Megan performed their final act of mutual delusion. Despite the vicious hatred simmering between them, they both dressed in their absolute finest designer clothing, preparing to project an image of wealthy, untouchable success. Devin wore his sharpest tailored suit, attempting to mask the terrified aura of a man who was one bank deadline away from total bankruptcy. Megan draped herself in an elegant cashmere dress, carrying her favorite imported leather handbag, completely convinced she was about to secure her multi-million-dollar golden parachute. They climbed into an expensive black car service, riding in heavy silence toward the downtown financial district. As they pulled up to the sleek glass facade of the title transaction office, they shared a brief, unified look of arrogant anticipation. They marched through the revolving doors, squaring their shoulders. They were absolutely certain they were moments away from signing a simple piece of paper and walking out with a massive multi-million-dollar check that would solve all their problems forever. The sleek glass walls of the downtown title office offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, but Devin and Megan only had eyes for the thick stack of legal documents resting on the polished mahogany table. The independent cash buyer, a wealthy real estate investor looking for a quick turnaround, sat across from them with a relaxed demeanor. He had brought exactly what they desperately needed, a certified cashier's check for $1.8 million. The escrow officer, a stern-looking woman in a gray suit, meticulously arranged the final transfer contracts. She placed a heavy gold pen right next to the signature line. Devin took a deep breath, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit. He picked up the pen, feeling the cool metal against his sweating palms. This was his salvation. He pressed the ink to the heavy parchment paper and forged my exact signature with practiced precision. He signed the property transfer, the disclosure forms, and finally the financial receipt for the multi-million-dollar payout. As the notary stamped her official seal onto the paper, Devin let out a long, shuddering breath. He leaned back in his leather executive chair, and a smug, triumphant smile spread across his face. He actually believed he had done it. He thought he had successfully stolen my suburban villa, erased his $500,000 corporate debt, and secured his absolute freedom. Beside him, Megan stared hungrily at the certified check sliding across the table, her mind already calculating the exact moment she would file her emergency divorce injunction to steal her 50% cut and vanish to Paris. Devin reached out his hand, hovering mere inches above the life-saving check, but his fingers never touched the paper. The heavy frosted glass doors of the conference room were suddenly violently shoved open, hitting the rubber wall stoppers with a loud, sharp crack. The cheerful, professional atmosphere of the room evaporated in a single, terrifying second. I rolled my wheelchair directly through the threshold, my posture perfectly straight, my expression carved from solid ice. Gregory Thorne marched right beside me, clutching a thick black leather briefcase. Flanking us on either side were two imposing federal agents dressed in dark, immaculate suits with official badges clipped securely to their belts. The investor jumped out of his seat in sheer confusion, but Devin and Megan reacted as if they had just seen a ghost. Devin froze completely, his outstretched arm suspended mid-air, the triumphant smile sliding off his face to reveal a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Megan gasped loudly, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth as all the color instantly drained from her cheeks. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing with lethal authority in the confined space. "I apologize for interrupting this real estate closing, but I am afraid there is a significant issue with the paperwork." The escrow officer frowned, standing up defensively. "Excuse me, sir, you cannot just barge into a private signing. This is a closed transaction." Gregory Thorne stepped forward, placing his briefcase onto the edge of the mahogany table. "It is not a closed transaction," Ma'am Gregory corrected her, his tone dripping with absolute legal certainty. "My name is Gregory Thorne, and I am the senior legal counsel representing Mr. Tobias Wright, the sole lawful owner of the property being discussed today. The man sitting across from you is his son Devin Wright, who possesses zero legal authority to authorize the sale of the suburban villa. The documents you just stamped are entirely fraudulent." Devin scrambled out of his chair, knocking it backward onto the carpet. "Dad, what are you doing?" he stammered, his voice cracking in a pathetic display of panic. "You are confused. You are supposed to be at the house. We are just handling some administrative family matters for you." "Do not lie to me, Devin," I commanded, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register that made the entire room stand perfectly still. "You are not handling administrative matters. You just committed federal grand larceny right in front of a licensed state notary." The lead federal agent stepped around the table, his eyes locked entirely on my son. "Sir, step away from the documents," the agent ordered, his voice carrying the heavy, unmistakable weight of law enforcement. The real estate investor, realizing he had almost been swindled out of nearly $2 million, immediately snatched his cashier's check back from the center of the table. "You told me this was a clean off-market family transfer," the investor shouted, glaring furiously at Devin. "You tried to sell me stolen property." Gregory unlatched his briefcase and pulled out the original certified property deeds alongside a verified sample of my actual signature. He placed them directly next to the freshly signed transfer contracts. He looked at the escrow officer, who was now visibly trembling. "Compare the signatures," Gregory instructed. "My client has not signed a single document regarding the sale of this villa. Devin bypassed a security vault yesterday and stole the physical title. He then orchestrated this rapid cash sale, intending to abscond with the funds before the county registrar could flag the illegal transfer." The notary inspected the signatures and gasped, realizing she had just unwittingly facilitated a massive financial crime. The federal agent did not waste another second. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and marched directly toward Devin. "Devin Wright," the agent announced, grabbing my son by the shoulder and forcefully spinning him around. "You are under arrest for suspicion of wire fraud, grand larceny, and the federal forgery of real estate documents." Devin panicked, thrashing weakly against the agent's iron grip. "No, wait, you cannot do this," he cried out, tears of absolute terror welling in his eyes. "Dad, please tell them to stop. I had to do it. The bank was going to destroy me over that corporate loan. You have to save me. You have to call them off." The second agent grabbed his other arm, expertly twisting it behind his back and snapping the cold steel cuffs securely around his wrists. The sharp metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I looked at my son, who was now openly weeping, as the agent began reciting his Miranda rights. "I am not saving you, Devin," I replied, my gaze completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "I warned you that actions have consequences. You chose to forge my name. Now you get to face the federal government entirely on your own." The crushing reality of federal prison completely shattered whatever remained of Devin's sanity. He slumped forward, crying uncontrollably as the agent secured his restraints, reading him his rights as his entire world collapsed around him. The secondary agent then turned his sharp, calculating gaze directly toward Megan, who was still sitting frozen in her leather chair. "Ma'am," the agent said, stepping toward her, "we are going to need you to come down to the bureau for questioning regarding your involvement in this conspiracy." Megan physically recoiled as if she had been burned. The absolute terror of losing her freedom and facing federal charges instantly overrode any lingering loyalty she had to her marriage. She stood up, her face turning a sickly shade of chalk white, and her ruthless survival instincts viciously kicked in. Without a single second of hesitation, she pointed her trembling finger directly into her handcuffed husband's face. "I had absolutely nothing to do with this," she shrieked, her voice echoing hysterically across the room. "I did not know the documents were forged. Devin forced me to come here. He manipulated everything and lied to me, just like he lied to his father. She was throwing him completely to the wolves, desperately sacrificing the man she married just to save her own skin. The preliminary hearing took place in a sterile federal courtroom 2 days later, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the absolute wreckage of my son's life. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my posture impeccably straight, flanked by Gregory Thorne and Nina. We were there to witness the spectacular implosion of the two people who had conspired to erase me from the world. When Megan was called to address the federal judge, she delivered a theatrical performance that would have won her an Academy Award. She had completely abandoned her designer wardrobe and heavy makeup, opting instead for a modest conservative beige dress and a simple low ponytail. She stood before the magistrate clutching a tissue with trembling hands, playing the role of the terrified, naive bride who had been thoroughly deceived by her tyrannical husband. "Your Honor," she whimpered, her voice cracking with perfectly timed artificial sobs. "I had absolutely no idea Devin was forging those real estate documents or manipulating corporate funds. He controlled every single aspect of our finances. He kept me completely in the dark about his massive debts and lied to my face about his business dealings." She wiped a fake tear from her cheek, looking up at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. "He manipulated my entire family. He used my brother's startup as a front without my knowledge. I was just a devoted wife trying to support the man I loved. When he dragged me to that title office, I thought we were just signing standard family trust updates. I was a hostage to his financial abuse, Your Honor. Please, you have to believe me. I am entirely innocent in this nightmare." Sitting at the defense table, dressed in a wrinkled standard-issue county jail uniform, Devin looked like a man who had just been struck by a high-speed freight train. He was utterly paralyzed, staring at the woman he had alienated his entire family to protect. The sheer magnitude of her betrayal hit him with the crushing weight of a collapsing skyscraper. For years he had worshipped the ground Megan walked on. He had bought her the diamonds, the exotic vacations, and the luxury cars, all funded by my corporate empire. He had willingly committed federal mortgage fraud just to secure a $500,000 loan to impress her grifter family. He had stood in my bedroom and demanded I sign away my fortune to save her lifestyle. And now this very same woman was standing in a federal courtroom, ruthlessly stabbing him in the back and offering him up as a sacrificial lamb to save her own skin. I watched my son closely as his entire reality fractured into a million irreparable pieces. His jaw trembled and his shoulders slumped forward as the absolute colossal stupidity of his life choices finally caught up with him. He had traded a father who would have moved mountains for him for a parasitic narcissist who was happily feeding him to the federal prosecutors. Devin slowly turned his head around and locked eyes with me across the crowded courtroom. There was no anger left in his gaze. There was no arrogance and no entitlement. There was only a hollow, haunting despair. In that brief, silent exchange, he finally understood every single warning I had ever given him about the toxic nature of the woman he chose to marry. He realized that he had burned his own legacy to the ground for a completely worthless illusion. He looked away, burying his face in his manacled hands, completely broken and utterly alone. Megan continued to weep softly at the podium, convinced she had successfully manipulated the federal magistrate with her helpless victim routine. She thought she had secured her immunity by throwing Devin directly under the bus, but she had severely underestimated the depth of my preparation. Gregory Thorne stood up from the gallery bench, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, and approached the prosecution table. With the judge's permission, Gregory submitted a heavy encrypted flash drive into the official court record. "Your Honor," Gregory stated, his voice echoing with a blistering, lethal authority. "The victim in this case, Mr. Tobias Wright, has provided supplemental evidence that completely dismantles the defendant's fabricated narrative of innocent ignorance. Mrs. Wright was not a passive bystander manipulated by her husband. She was the chief architect of a deeply malicious conspiracy to commit elder abuse and medical fraud." Gregory signaled the court clerk to access the drive. A moment later, the high-definition audio recording captured by Nina in my private study began to play over the courtroom speakers. The entire room fell into a dead, shocked silence as Megan's shrill, demanding voice filled the air. "Doctor, you need to document how aggressive he has been acting," her recorded voice hissed, clearly instructing the corrupt private physician. "He literally sold a highly valuable family asset this morning for absolutely no logical reason. He is clearly not in his right mind." The recording continued, broadcasting her undeniable complicity in fabricating a psychiatric diagnosis to force me into a memory care facility. But Gregory was not finished. He projected the security camera footage from the hospital waiting room showing Megan deliberately photographing my private medical contacts. He then displayed the fraudulent medical power of attorney side by side with the digital footprint proving the document was drafted and submitted from Meghan's personal laptop. The evidence was irrefutable and utterly devastating. She was not a naive bride. She was a highly calculated predator who actively plotted to lock a sane man in a psychiatric ward so she could freely loot his multi-million-dollar estate. The federal judge glared down at Meghan with profound disgust, instantly recognizing the depth of her perjury. The magistrate slammed the gavel down unequivocally, rejecting her plea for leniency and officially denying her request for immunity. Both Devon and Meghan were formally indicted on multiple federal charges ranging from wire fraud and grand larceny to conspiracy and elder abuse. However, due to the overcrowded holding facilities and pending the commencement of the full federal trial, the judge granted them a temporary conditional release. Their passports were immediately confiscated, their bank accounts remained entirely frozen by the authorities, and they were placed under strict, heavily monitored bail. Stripped of their designer armor, their dignity, and their stolen wealth, they walked out of the courthouse completely broke and bound to each other by mutual hatred. With zero access to their luxury vehicles or credit cards, they were forced to scrape together their last few dollars to share a miserable, silent cab ride. They were heading back to the suburban villa, holding on to their very last shred of hope, believing they at least had a comfortable roof over their heads while they awaited their inevitable prison sentences. The miserable cab ride from the federal courthouse felt like a silent funeral procession. Devon and Meghan sat on opposite sides of the cramped back seat, refusing to even look at each other. Stripped of their passports, their bank accounts completely frozen, and their high society reputations entirely atomized, they were riding solely on the fumes of sheer denial. As the cab turned into their upscale suburban neighborhood, a fragile, desperate hope began to form in Devon's exhausted mind. The disastrous cash sale at the title office had been thwarted by my sudden arrival alongside the federal agents, but in his twisted, frantic logic, that meant the property had not actually been sold to the investor. He still possessed the original keys in his pocket. He still had the massive multi-million-dollar villa to hide inside. Meghan clearly shared this exact same delusion. She aggressively smoothed out her beige dress, her eyes fixed intently on the approaching driveway. They were facing imminent federal prison time, but they genuinely believed they could simply retreat to their luxurious sanctuary, lock the heavy mahogany doors, and spend the next few months living in total comfort while their public defenders negotiated a plea deal. They thought they still had a massive fortress to protect them from the harsh reality of the outside world. The cab driver slammed on the brakes, dropping them off at the end of the long driveway and demanding his payment in cash. Devon handed over his last remaining $50 bill, stepping out onto the familiar pavement. He took a deep breath, fully expecting to walk through his front doors and collapse into his custom Italian leather sofa. But as Devon and Meghan turned to face the property, their fragile illusion of safety was instantly and violently shattered. The grand wrought-iron gates of the villa were pushed wide open, but the sprawling driveway was not empty. A massive commercial moving truck was parked right in front of the grand entrance with its ramp fully extended. Scattered across the pristine manicured lawn was a chaotic, towering mountain of heavy-duty garbage bags, cheap cardboard boxes, and transparent plastic storage bins. Meghan let out a blood-curdling shriek as she recognized the contents spilling out onto the green grass. Her entire meticulously curated collection of custom designer dresses, her imported silk bedsheets, and her incredibly expensive luxury handbags had been unceremoniously tossed into the front yard like absolute trash. Devon's custom golf clubs, his expensive tailored suits, and his prized collection of vintage watches were piled haphazardly into the dirt. A crew of movers was showing zero respect for the items, handling the extravagant wardrobe of two indicted federal criminals with sheer indifference. Devon sprinted forward, his face red with shock and unadulterated fury. "What do you think you are doing?" he bellowed at a burly worker carrying a massive flat-screen television out the front door. "Put that down right now. You are trespassing on private property. I am calling the police." Meghan joined him, screaming hysterically as she tried to salvage a pair of crushed designer heels from the lawn. "You cannot evict us without a court order," she shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "We know our tenant rights. You have to give us a 30-day written notice." But as she screamed, her eyes drifted upward toward the heavy stone pillars framing the main security gate. The color drained from her face completely. Bolted securely into the masonry was a brand-new polished bronze plaque gleaming brightly in the afternoon sun. It read, "The Camille Wright Foundation for At-Risk Youth," in crisp, elegant lettering. Below it, a secondary metal sign was posted stating private charitable property, authorized personnel only. Devon stared at the bronze plaque, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. He could not comprehend what he was reading. The name of his late mother blazoned across a charitable foundation plaque on the very house he thought he owned. The heavy front door swung open again, but it was not another moving company employee carrying a box. A tall, sharp-looking man in a dark-tailored suit walked out onto the front porch, flanked by two armed private security guards. It was a senior associate attorney from Gregory Thorne's elite legal firm, holding a thick clipboard and a highly official property vacatur notice. "Good afternoon, Devon," the attorney said, his voice ringing with absolute professional detachment. "There is no need to call the police. The local authorities are already fully aware of our presence here today, and they have explicitly authorized this property clearing." Devon marched up to the steps, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "You cannot just throw our belongings onto the street," he demanded, his voice shaking with desperate rage. "I hold the original deed to this house." The attorney offered a cold, pitying smile. "You hold a worthless piece of stolen paper, Devon. Your father, Tobias Wright, initiated a full legal transfer of this entire estate over 5 weeks ago. He irrevocably donated this house and the surrounding property to a newly established charity foundation designed to house and educate underprivileged minority youth. The paperwork cleared the state registry long before you ever walked into that title office." Devon staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. Megan dropped the designer shoes she was holding, her mouth opening in sheer horror. The attorney stepped down the stairs, handing Devon a copy of the verified charitable trust deed. "When you forged your father's signature at the notary office attempting to sell this villa to a cash buyer, you were not just attempting to steal from Tobias," the attorney explained with lethal precision. "You were actively attempting to sell a property that legally belonged to a registered nonprofit organization. You tried to defraud a charity. Your forged contract was fundamentally invalid from the exact second you signed it because you can never sell what you do not own. You have 0 tenant rights. You have 0 ownership claims. You are officially trespassing on charitable grounds." The security guards stepped forward, forming an imposing barricade between Devon and the front doors. The attorney pointed a pen toward the street. "Your personal belongings have been removed from the premises as a courtesy. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your garbage bags and vacate the sidewalk before I have you arrested for loitering on foundation property." Devon collapsed onto the concrete curb, completely broken. He stared blankly at the massive pile of trash bags containing the pathetic remnants of his lavish, privileged life. He had no job, no car, no bank account, and now he did not even have a roof over his head. He was officially a homeless federal criminal sitting in the dirt. Megan, realizing the absolute finality of their ruin, felt a blind, primal panic seize her entire body. She could not survive on the streets. She could not sleep on a park bench. Her ruthless survival instincts flared up one final time. She pulled her cell phone from her pocket, her hands shaking violently. She still had one last lifeline. She dialed the number for her wealthy, arrogant parents, Richard and Patricia. They had money. They had an enormous house in the suburbs. They would wire her emergency funds, hire a better defense attorney, and give her a soft, warm bed to sleep in while she plotted her next move. She pressed the phone to her ear, listening to it ring, completely unaware that a catastrophic financial apocalypse had already detonated inside her parents' home. Megan pressed the phone tightly to her ear, listening to the automated voicemail greeting of her mother. She dialed again, panic rising in her throat, but the call went unanswered. She had absolutely no idea that 30 miles away, inside the supposedly impenetrable fortress of her parents' upscale suburban home, Richard and Patricia were currently experiencing their own catastrophic financial execution. The $500,000 commercial loan that Devon had fraudulently secured for Kyle imaginary tech startup had not just vanished into thin air when I pulled my corporate guarantor status. It had triggered a massive, immediate chain reaction of devastating financial defaults. Kyle, arrogant and completely incompetent, had already spent a significant portion of those illicit funds on luxury office leases and non-refundable executive perks. When the bank aggressively recalled the loan and froze the corporate accounts, they did not just stop at Devon. They went directly after the beneficiary of the fraudulent wire transfer. The federal authorities and the commercial lending board seized Kyle's entire shell company. But the collateral damage ran much deeper. Richard, blinded by his own greed and his absolute certainty that my wealth would cover their mistakes, had foolishly cross-collateralized his own home equity to secure a secondary line of credit for his son-doomed venture. The moment Kyle's startup officially imploded under federal investigation, the bank initiated an aggressive, merciless foreclosure on Richard and Patricia property. The very same morning Megan was thrown out onto the street, her parents were served with a formal notice of immediate asset seizure, desperate and completely out of options. Richard and Patricia did not drive to the federal courthouse to support their indicted daughter, nor did they drive to the suburban villa to rescue her from the curb. Instead, they drove their leased luxury sedan directly to my primary estate. Nina alerted me through the internal intercom that a frantic couple was arguing with the security guards at the main gate, begging for an audience. I instructed security to let them through. I wanted to look them in the eye. When Richard and Patricia were escorted into my grand sunroom, they were completely unrecognizable from the haughty, condescending socialites who had strutted through my dining room just days prior. Richard's face was flushed, his expensive golf shirt wrinkled and soaked with nervous sweat. Patricia was openly weeping, her carefully styled hair disheveled, her hands shaking violently as she clutched her designer purse. They stood before my wheelchair, stripped of their arrogance, reduced to terrified beggars. "Tobias, please, you have to help us," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking as he completely abandoned his pride. "The bank is seizing everything. They are foreclosing on our house today. Kyle is facing a federal indictment for receiving stolen funds, and they are threatening to liquidate my retirement accounts and my pension to cover the damages. You have billions of dollars, Tobias. $500,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change." Patricia fell to her knees onto my Persian rug, sobbing uncontrollably. "We are going to be homeless, Tobias," she wailed, reaching out to grasp the armrest of my wheelchair. "You cannot let them do this to our family. We know Devin made a terrible mistake, and we know Megan was wrong, but you cannot punish us for their crimes. Please just authorize a wire transfer to clear the debt. Call the bank and tell them you are reinstating the corporate guarantor status. We will do anything you want. We will pay you back. Just save our home and keep our son out of federal prison." I looked down at the weeping woman on my floor and the desperate, broken man standing beside her. They were groveling, throwing away every ounce of their supposed superiority for a fraction of the wealth they had spent years silently despising me for. I did not flinch. I did not offer a comforting hand or a sympathetic word. I calmly reached over to the small mahogany table beside my chair, picked up my porcelain teacup, and took a slow, deliberate sip of Earl Grey. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the suffocating weight of their own humiliation. "I find this sudden display of humility deeply fascinating," Richard first finally said, my voice echoing with an absolute icy calm. I placed the teacup back onto its saucer with a sharp clink. "Just a few nights ago, standing in my formal dining room and drinking my vintage scotch, you loudly proclaimed that it was time to pass the torch to the younger, more capable generation. You boasted that it takes a sharp, modern mind to navigate today's corporate landscape, and you celebrated the fact that Devin was steering the ship away from my outdated business models." I leaned forward slightly, fixing my cold gaze on his terrified eyes. "Well, Richard, this is the modern corporate landscape. Your sharp, visionary son just drove his startup straight into a federal fraud investigation, and your highly capable son-in-law just bankrupted your entire family. Why are you coming to an outdated, senile old man to fix your brilliant, synergistic partnership?" Richard opened his mouth, stammering, trying to formulate a defense, but I immediately cut him off, turning my attention to the sobbing woman on my rug. "And you, Patricia," I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You patted my shoulder and told my entire dinner party that it was tragic to see me in a wheelchair. You mocked my cognitive state and assured me that I was in good hands and that you would make sure I was comfortable in my final years." I looked down at her with absolute, unwavering contempt. "I am perfectly comfortable, Patricia. The real tragedy is watching you kneel on my floor, begging for a handout from the very black man you have spent years looking down upon. You built your entire identity on the illusion of supremacy, convinced that your status made you inherently better than me. But the moment the bank came calling, you rushed straight to my doorstep to beg for my money. I will not authorize a single wire transfer. I will not make a single phone call to save your home. You enabled your daughter greed. You celebrated my son theft. And you co-signed a fraudulent loan. Now you get to experience the absolute destruction of your own legacy. Get off my floor and get out of my house." The security guards immediately stepped forward, grabbing Richard by the arm and firmly instructing Patricia to stand up. They offered no resistance. Completely shattered and entirely out of options, Megan's parents were escorted out of my mansion, their heads hung low in utter disgrace. They walked out of my front doors, knowing they were returning to an empty, foreclosed house, officially joining their daughter in absolute financial ruin. The empire of lies they had built was entirely reduced to ash. I watched their leased car drive away, taking a final peaceful sip of my tea. The board was completely cleared. Every parasite that had attempted to feed on my legacy had been systematically eradicated. But the final chapter of this war was yet to be written. Weeks passed, the wheels of the federal justice system turning with slow, crushing inevitability. The day of the official sentencing finally arrived. I adjusted my tailored suit and headed to the downtown courthouse, ready to watch Devin and Megan face the ultimate, inescapable consequences of their monumental betrayal. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung open, and I rolled my wheelchair down the center aisle, positioning myself in the front row right behind the prosecution table. Gregory Thorne sat beside me, adjusting his tie with the quiet confidence of a man who had already won the war. At the defense table sat the hollow, broken remnants of my son and his wife. Devin and Megan were completely unrecognizable from the haughty elite socialites who had strutted through my mansion just a few months prior. Devin wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The arrogance that used to radiate from him was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, trembling terror. Megan looked even worse. Stripped of her expensive blowout, her heavy designer makeup, and her imported silk dresses, she looked like a fragile, terrified ghost. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy knot, and she gnawed nervously on her lower lip, her eyes darting frantically around the imposing courtroom. There was no trace of the vicious woman who had screamed at me in my bedroom or the cunning manipulator who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward. They were just two exhausted, broke criminals waiting for the heavy gavel of federal justice to smash their lives into dust. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar fraud, peered down at them over her glasses, her expression promising absolute ruin. The judge called the court to order and invited me to deliver my victim impact statement before handing down the final sentencing. I locked the wheels of my chair, gripped the edges of the podium microphone, and looked directly at the two trembling figures across the room. I did not speak with anger or malice. I spoke with the chilling, absolute clarity of a father who had systematically dismantled his own bloodline to save his legacy. Your Honor, I began, my voice echoing clearly through the silent courtroom. The two individuals sitting before you attempted to steal a lifetime of my hard work. They forged federal documents, committed grand larceny, and conspired to strip away my fundamental human rights by fabricating a medical diagnosis. They did this out of pure, unadulterated greed. I paused, letting the weight of their crimes hang heavy in the air. Devin flinched, staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. However, I continued, my gaze shifting to the magistrate. I am not asking this court to send my son to a federal penitentiary. Sending him to a cell where he will sit in idle isolation will teach him absolutely nothing about the value of an honest dollar. Instead, I respectfully request a different form of restitution. I ask that Devin be sentenced to 2,000 hours of mandated, strictly supervised community service, and I request that this service be served exclusively at the Camille Wright Foundation for At-Risk Youth, the exact same property he fraudulently attempted to sell. Let him mop the floors, scrub the toilets, and serve meals inside the very luxury villa he once believed he was entitled to own. Let him learn what actual labor feels like under the supervision of the charity he tried to defraud. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the poetic, grueling nature of the proposed punishment. As for Megan, I stated, turning my cold gaze toward my former daughter-in-law, her primary role was facilitating the forgery and initiating the medical conspiracy. Since she has already surrendered every remaining asset to pay her legal fees and has cooperated with the prosecution against her husband, I leave her fate to the standard guidelines of this court. The judge nodded, taking my words into careful consideration. She leafed through the thick stack of plea agreements Gregory had aggressively negotiated with the defense. The trap was perfectly executed, and the sentence was about to be officially delivered. The judge slammed her wooden gavel down, commanding the room to total attention. Devin Wright, she announced, her voice booming with legal finality, based on the victim extraordinary request and your guilty plea to federal wire fraud, I am suspending your prison sentence. Instead, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years of strict federal probation and 2,000 hours of mandated manual labor at the Camille Wright Foundation. If you miss a single shift, if you are late by 1 minute, or if you violate any term of your probation, you will instantly serve the maximum 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Devin visibly slumped over the defense table, letting out a ragged, humiliating sob of relief and sheer dread. He was spared the horrors of prison, but he was legally condemned to return to his former palace as a glorified janitor. The judge then turned her piercing glare toward Megan. Megan Wright, you are convicted of conspiracy to commit medical fraud and accessory to grand larceny. You are sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation and a suspended sentence. You are forbidden from contacting the victim, and you will submit to regular federal monitoring. The court is adjourned. The gavel struck the block one final time, sealing their fates forever. As the gallery began to clear out, the final, most pathetic act of their toxic relationship unfolded right there in the aisles of the courtroom. Megan, aggressive divorce attorney, marched up to the defense table, slapping a thick manila folder down in front of Devon. It was the finalized, expedited dissolution of marriage. Megan grabbed a pen and signed the documents with vicious, trembling speed, completely eager to sever herself from the ruined man sitting beside her. "You are a pathetic, useless failure," she hissed at Devon, not caring who heard her. "I lost my family, my money, and my entire life because I trusted you to secure your own inheritance. I never want to see your face again." Devon snatched the pen from her hand, his own bitter rage finally boiling over. He scribbled his signature onto the divorce decree, severing their bond permanently. "You are a parasite, Megan," he spat back, his voice thick with venom and regret. "You drained me dry and threw me to the wolves. Go crawl back to your bankrupt parents." Without another word, Megan grabbed her cheap handbag and stormed out of the double doors, heading out into the city as a broke, convicted felon with absolutely zero prospects. Devon was escorted out through the side exit by his probation officer, beginning his long, humiliating journey to the bottom of the working class. They walked out of the courthouse in completely opposite directions, tearing each other to pieces until the very last second. I sat quietly in my wheelchair, watching the heavy wooden doors swing shut behind the two people who had conspired to erase my existence. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt incredibly light, completely purged of the toxic, suffocating greed that had poisoned my life for the past year. Gregory Thorne placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, offering a rare, genuine smile of absolute victory. "We did it, Tobias," Gregory murmured quietly. "It is finally over." I nodded slowly, a profound, undeniable sense of peace washing over my healing body. I signaled to Nina, and she gently turned my wheelchair around, guiding me down the center aisle and out into the bright, sunlit corridor of the federal building. I took a deep, steadying breath of the fresh city air. I had successfully orchestrated the total destruction of an entitled, parasitic generation, ripping my legacy out of their fraudulent hands. But as the warm sunlight hit my face, I knew my work was not entirely finished. A brand new chapter was just beginning for the man who had single-handedly crushed his family only to rebuild it from the absolute ashes. The journey back to my sprawling estate was the most peaceful drive I had experienced in months. As the heavy wrought-iron gate swung open and the car glided up the manicured driveway, I looked at the massive stone facade of my home with an entirely new perspective. For weeks, the walls of this mansion had felt like a suffocating prison, crawling with the greedy whispers and toxic plots of a son and daughter-in-law who wanted me locked away in a psychiatric ward. Now, stepping through the grand double doors, I was met with a profound, absolute silence. It was not the heavy, suffocating quiet of a lonely old man abandoned by his family. It was the crisp, clean silence of total liberation. I rolled my wheelchair into the grand foyer, breathing in the familiar scent of lemon oil and polished mahogany. Nina walked quietly beside me, offering a respectful nod before heading to the kitchen to prepare my afternoon tea. The parasitic entities that had tried to drain my legacy dry had been surgically removed from the premises. There were no more fake smiles, no more hidden agendas, and no more arrogant demands echoing down the hallways. The air in my home was finally breathable again. I was alone, but for the first time in an incredibly long time, I was completely free. I had successfully defended the empire Camille and I built, and I had done it entirely on my own terms. A few days after the federal sentencing, Gregory Thorne arrived at the estate with a final stack of legal documents. We sat in my study, bathed in the warm afternoon light, finalizing a project that meant more to me than any commercial real estate deal or logistics contract. With a few deliberate strokes of my pen, I officially established the Camille Wright Memorial Scholarship Fund. I endowed the foundation with a massive initial contribution, ensuring that for decades to come, brilliant, underprivileged minority students would receive full-ride scholarships to top-tier universities. It was the perfect tribute to the woman who had stood by my side when we had absolutely nothing. Camille had always believed in building ladders for those coming up behind us, and now her name would forever be associated with opportunity and excellence rather than the greedy entitlement Devon had displayed. But the most significant victory of all involved my 7-year-old grandson. Following her federal conviction and subsequent highly publicized divorce, Megan had lost all leverage. Stripped of her financial resources and facing strict federal probation, she was forced to accept a grueling custody arrangement meticulously orchestrated by Gregory. My grandson was legally assigned to spend every single weekend and all major holidays at my estate. When the boy arrived that first Friday afternoon looking timid and unsure, I made sure the house was filled with his favorite toys and the smell of freshly baked cookies. Without his mother hovering over him, whispering toxic lies into his ear about his grandfather, the boy quickly blossomed. We spent hours in the sunroom building complex model airplanes and talking about his favorite subjects in school. I watched him laugh, completely shielded from the poisonous materialistic values Megan had tried to instill in him. He was safe inside the financial and emotional fortress I had built for him. I was personally ensuring that the right legacy would skip a generation, passing directly from me to a young boy who would be raised with the exact same values of hard work, humility, and respect that Camille and I had shared. I made it my personal mission to teach him the history of our family, showing him the old photographs of the rusted delivery truck that started it all. I wanted him to understand that true wealth is not measured by designer clothes or luxury vacations, but by the integrity of your character and the resilience of your spirit. By removing Megan's toxic influence, I was actively saving his mind from the same corruption that had ruined his parents. 6 months passed since the day the gavel fell in that federal courtroom. The harsh winter gave way to a brilliant, blooming spring. I sat in my wheelchair on the expansive back patio overlooking the vibrant rose gardens that Camille had planted decades ago. Nina stepped out through the glass doors, holding my daily medical chart with a satisfied smile. "You are officially cleared by the orthopedic surgeon, Mr. Wright," she announced, her voice ringing with genuine professional pride. "The bone density scans are perfect and your ribs have completely healed. You do not need the chair anymore." I looked down at my leg, feeling the solid, rebuilt strength in my muscles. I gripped the armrests, planted my feet firmly onto the warm stone patio, and pushed myself upward. I stood at my full height, taking a deep, steadying breath of the fragrant morning air. I did not stagger. I did not lean on Nina for support. I took one step, then another, walking smoothly and confidently down the stone path and into the sunlit garden. The physical recovery perfectly mirrored the restoration of my entire life. I had been broken, battered, and heavily underestimated, but I had healed stronger than ever. As I walked among the blooming roses, my thoughts briefly drifted to Devon. According to Gregory, my disgraced son was currently wearing a janitorial uniform, scrubbing the floors of the very suburban villa he had fraudulently attempted to sell. He was fulfilling his 2,000 hours of mandated manual labor under the strict supervision of the charity directors. It was a harsh, bloody lesson, but it was the only one that could possibly save his soul. I had not destroyed Devon out of hatred or petty vengeance. I destroyed his false reality because it was the absolute only way to force him to rebuild his life as a genuine man. If he ever wanted to earn back a fraction of his self-respect, he would have to do it with a mop in his hands and sweat on his brow. He would have to learn what it truly meant to work for a living, just as I had done 40 years ago. I did not ruin his life. I simply burned away the toxic, parasitic facade he had constructed, leaving him with nothing but the absolute raw truth. He was finally learning the crushing weight of consequence, and perhaps one day, years from now, he might actually understand that this brutal execution of his ego was the greatest act of fatherly love I could have ever given him. I stopped near the center of the garden, tilting my head back to feel the comforting warmth of the morning sun against my face. A quiet, deeply satisfied smile spread across my lips. The ruthless purge of my family tree was officially complete. The parasites who had attempted to feed on my legacy had been systematically eradicated, stripped of their power, and banished to the harsh reality of the working class. The wealth that Camille and I had sacrificed everything to build was entirely secure, locked behind impenetrable trusts and charitable foundations that would serve the world long after I was gone. My grandson was safe, my empire was thriving, and my home was finally a sanctuary of absolute peace. The board had been entirely cleared, and the pieces had been reset exactly as I intended. I turned around and walked back toward the grand mansion, my steps echoing with the steady, unbreakable rhythm of a man who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged completely victorious. Order had been perfectly restored. The greatest lesson I took away from this ordeal is that true parenting never really ends, even when your children are fully grown. We often confuse financial support with unconditional love, believing that shielding our kids from hardship is the ultimate parental duty. But handing someone the world on a silver platter only robs them of the strength required to carry it. Wealth without character is simply a loaded weapon in the hands of a fool. Sometimes the most profound act of love you can offer your family is the willingness to let them fall so they can finally learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. If you found value in my journey, please leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with setting firm family boundaries, and do not forget to subscribe for more stories.